With the latest moves from Doge, there are deep concerns among Democrats that they will begin to slice off Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the conversation around cutting the federal budget. People often talk about entitlements and how this is a large portion of those funds. But we here at Timcast, we like to talk about how culture is substantially more important than policy, because culture will dictate what the policy ultimately becomes. Which leads us to the initial opening point here, the question over welfare, how it's impacted families, crime rates, and feminism. So we're going to start with this debate, and we'll see where it takes us. We've got a couple gentlemen joining us to debate this idea. Good sir, who are you?
My name's Conor. I'm closer. Okay. Hi. My name's Conor. I'm a science fiction, political, and philosophy nerd. I'm a Marine Corps and law enforcement veteran. I run a channel called Counterpoints 40K and another channel called Counterpoints, and we are a part of the Valor Media Network. You should type that into your YouTube search bar. And basically, it's a bunch of veterans, first responders who are trying to create a more positive, pro-masculine culture separate from the red pill.
Right on. And sir, who are you?
I'm Scott. Fabian Liberty. You can look me up anywhere, just as Fabian Liberty, predominantly on YouTube. I'm an anarcho-capitalist, libertarian, right-wing anarchist. You kind of whatever you want to call it in that domain. I'm just a guy that streams on the internet, talks about mostly philosophy, objectivist philosophy, economics. My background is in psychology, but I don't get as many opportunities to talk about it. So I'm excited to talk about this issue and blend them together.
So it's easy then. Welfare is bad. We all agree. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all next time.
Wrong.
Yeah. I wish it was that easy.
Well, let's kick it off. Why? So you're a proponent of the welfare system?
Yeah, I think that social spending, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's, the physical security, social tiers. I think that it's the government's job in order to support those tiers so we have a healthy society. I identify as center-right. I'm conservative in a healthy chunk of ways. So I think that in order to have a healthy conservative society, you need to make sure that people can become fully formed human beings.
That sounds like a leftist position.
Well, leftism, no offense, but leftist traveling in these circles, that's either socialist or communist. I'm neither.
Well, what would you say then?
Yeah, I would say that I have an uphill battle because we have been brainwashed and propagandized on the effects of welfare for a long time. I would say historically, we had systems that were far better than the welfare state when looking at fraternal societies, what they were able to achieve, what they meant to people, how they gave purpose to men, how they created leaderships, how they fostered family. I would say that social capital is at an all-time low. Looking at things like Robert Putnam's kind of work on that and social capital theory. I would say that, looking at sociological theories such as, Anomy and, Durkheim and things that, looking at it from a structural functionalist position, I would say that welfare has destroyed the traditional provider role of males, has destroyed the gender balance. When we talk about taxation, we talk, taxation is theft. You hear that, taxes are too high. I think the most important thing to recognize when we talk about taxation is that we're talking about welfare, period. Right? Social Security entitlement spending for 600. That is 61% of our federal budget.
Wow.
The debt is 13% of our federal budget. Okay, so 74% of our entire federal budget is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security entitlement spending.
So the debt. What do you mean? Elaborate?
I mean that when you purchase, when the government needs to print money, right, they can sometimes, increase money supply in a lot of ways. But predominantly what they're going to do is they're going to sell bonds. They're going to find ways to get money now that they have to pay back later in some capacity. That has now reached 13% of our federal budget. So 74% of all the money you spend is entitled. We don't vote on that at all. That's not including TANF. That's not including Section 8 housing. That's not including, infrastructure bills. That's not including other forms of welfare. Okay, and when you look at inflation as a form of taxation, and you look at all of the taxes we have, carried interest and, inheritance tax and sales tax and gas tax, it's hard to tell how much it is, but it looks like over 50% of all of the money you make is taken by the government, and overwhelmingly, that's welfare.
All right, so I'm trying to dig into it without getting it too academic. That way we can actually, dig into the philosophy behind it or whatever. So hold on, you're saying that 70% of the federal budget goes to entitlements. Okay, you're
74.
saying that
Well, 61, sorry.
Okay, so a substantive amount of it is going to the interest on our debt, and we have a substantive amount of interest.
Yeah.
Okay, but at the same time, what we're talking about is, we talk about rights and responsibilities, right, in the United States of America. So we're all about rights. I do love rights, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, right to self-defense, limited government, all that kind of stuff. I think that's awesome. But when we're talking about our responsibilities to each other, I think that the kids who are coming up, they can't fend for themselves. The old people who are dying, they can't fend for themselves. And so it is the role of us through a collective agency like the government to make sure that children and old folks and disabled folks are taken care of. And that is a perfectly fine role for the government.
So you said it was 61%?
Yeah, 61%
You are
would be
wrong.
That would be Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Function 600. What is it now? Is it higher now?
Yeah.
I'm going off to like 2023 data.
As of 2024, it's at 63.
Okay.
I was just seeing
I'm sorry. It's even more
even more.
damn money. So like,
Okay,
look,
but what's the problem? So
like,
that's what I'm saying. You're saying 2/3 of it is spent on social welfare. I'm saying that these are things that the government should do. What's the problem with the government doing these things?
yeah. So we can look as a libertarian, as an ANCAP, I would be remiss if I didn't again say taxation.
You're way more aggressive on prime time reverie, man. You can tell me to fudge myself.
Well, no. So no, but hear me out here. Listen, I think before we can even have this conversation, we have to understand what has happened historically.
Okay.
Right. And there is this lie that is like, well, if the government won't do it, who will do it? And the thing is that in the 1800s and the early 1900s, we did it without the government. And we did it so fucking well that the government had to come in and regulate and destroy what we were doing because healthcare costs were too low. That is what our government did. They destroyed fraternal societies. In the 1920s, 1 in 3 men in America were a member of a fraternal society. By 1912, 1 in 25 men in America were a member of the Loyal Order of the Moose. You might hear like Moose Lodge, right? And for a half week's salary in 1912, you would get an annual membership and be a member of the Moose Lodge. What did you get for that? You got sick pay, you got unemployment. If you died, your kids went to an orphanage in Maryland where the people that graduated, males made 70.9% more than the average American male. Females made 62.5% more. You had everything you had elderly care. There was tons of these organizations. But there was one problem historically, which is that healthcare costs were too low and doctors weren't making enough money. So they used the state to crush these institutions.
This is a little conspiratorial for me.
It's not conspiratorial, it's fact.
Okay, you're saying that because it was so cheap that the federal government had to destroy the fraternal societies in order to replace them. Okay, yeah, you're taking facts and then you're like assuming motivation.
No, so I can quote.
Hey, buddy, listen. You talked for like 4 minutes. I want the opportunity to talk as well. Okay.
We said I wasn't aggressive enough.
True, I know that's my fault. So, anyways, the point is that there are also a whole bunch of narratives from the 19th century and the early 20th century, and those narratives were that the working class had to work in industrial tenement housing, that they worked in effectively like corporate housing, that the corporations were fleecing their own workers so they couldn't get by. They had subsistence living. The only way that they were able to survive was through these social networks, and it was a miserable existence. The whole reason why we started these, there was public outcry for this legislation in the first place was because there weren't the things that you were talking about. There weren't workers' protections. What legislation are you talking about?
What was their public outcry for legislation as pertains to fraternal
I don't
order
have
societies?
I don't have the name of the specific legislation passed 100 and some odd years ago, but I know for a fact that people were living in tenement housing with extended families. I know for a fact that the living conditions sucked. I know that the pay sucked, and I know that there was an outcry that basically what happened when you were a worker in the late 19th century or early 20th century, that basically if you lost your fingers to an industrial machine, the corporation told you to pound sand. And it's tough luck.
Okay,
That's why these programs were created, was because the corporations were telling young working families to go fudge themselves when they got screwed.
So none of that is an argument against what I stated. What you have said is that in history, at the turn of...
You said it was a federal conspiracy in order to destroy the fraternal societies.
Yes, and what you said has nothing to do with what I said, right?
Well, what I would say is this is how they destroyed the fraternal societies, because it was insufficient.
Well, you already admitted that you don't understand the history of fraternal societies,
No, I
right?
don't.
Which is fine because, like
You just made up a position, but go ahead.
Did I make up that position? Or are you saying that you
Did you hear me say into this microphone in the past 5 minutes, I don't understand the history of fraternal societies? Did I say that?
Well, you said that you're not
doesn't
aware
matter.
of what
Let's
the
move.
legislation was in terms of like and what those laws were or that process.
Okay, was there
that got
a
rid
law-
of them?
was
You're
there a
saying
law
it's
in the early
hold on,
20th
hold on,
century?
Hold on. You're saying that it's a conspiracy theory, right? And then you're saying these laws were passed by
saying
public
you're
outcry.
assigning motivation that you haven't evidenced. That's what I'm saying.
So let me get into it then. Okay, so again, as I said, 1 in 3 men in America were in these fraternal societies. I gave one example. There are a lot of other examples, but when you're talking about all of these things that are occurring within corporations, within as we move from an agrarian lifestyle into industrializing and et cetera. Like, yes, all of those things are true. What you said is that's absolutely true, but that's not an argument about why we need Social Security or welfare. That is an argument about what we were doing and what America looked like and what were our trials and tribulations in that time, right? Yes, things have gotten better, but that doesn't mean that welfare is the reason that things have gotten better. We invented tech. We became more industrialized. More people moved to cities. Like, there's a lot of other factors that occur here. My argument specifically is that Social Security that was brought in 1935 under the New Deal was a Band-Aid that has done a worse job of actually taking care of the elderly and taking care of families and community, and that there are a lot of downstream effects that we'll get into later than what fraternal order societies were doing.
I did a cursory search, and a cursory research suggests, I'm not saying it's correct, that the Social Security Act was largely favored and ultimately passed because of the Great Depression, and elderly individuals had no access to retirement or means of supporting themselves because the stock market had crashed. So what would you say to that? I mean, you mentioned it's welfare and Social Security wasn't the most effective way to do it. Do you believe that it was a temporary Band-Aid, a mistake to do? Should the elderly have just figured it out on their own?
No, so what I would say is that fraternal order societies...
Can I be a jerk real quick?
Sure, be a jerk.
Okay. I think you would say that. I think you would say that the private market should have figured it out. I think that you would say that the federal government should not have stepped in. I think you would say that these needs would step up, and then therefore the private society would have taken care of the old people if the federal government hadn't intervened.
Well, so because I'm speaking historically about what happened, I agree with you. Had the federal government not already began the process of destroying fraternal societies in the early 1920s,
Okay.
right? So we're talking about multiple things occurring here. So the thing is, the problem is, right? And so just to get into this, right? So when we're talking about the history of what happened with fraternal societies, is that they were using what was known as the lodge healthcare system, right? And so these fraternal societies, they were offering insurance. Eventually, places like the Securities Benefit Association, which there was a protection now through cradle to the grave, right? Like everything that they were doing was they were creating hospitals for the elderly. Like that was the whole point. You pay a half a week's salary for an annual membership, and you have access to a doctor whenever you want, emergency service, all that stuff, right? And then what ended up occurring, because healthcare costs were so low, medical associations began petitioning the government for laws. Okay, they began to say, we have to regulate these people. This is super, super dangerous. These people, many of the arguments that they were making was that healthcare costs are just unsustainably low, that this is going to cause an economic problem because doctors aren't making enough money, because the collective bargaining power of people working together in to have the lodge doctor system was making healthcare costs go down so much. So they petitioned, to bar doctors that use these services from, let me see if I can find
Well, I also thought
states here. It's fine.
go
ahead.
I have no problem finishing this train of thought, but I also thought we were going to talk about how like welfare created like the modern woman or the modern society or whatever, which I'm sure we'll get to. But I'm just saying, like,
Well, I want to establish the history of what happened and why we have welfare and understand, because there's a dual element here, right? It was cheaper. It was better healthcare, and government regulation destroyed it. Specifically with the National Fraternal Congress, they basically, in order to stop having doctors taken out of licenses and no longer being able to work with them, they worked with Congress in order to negotiate rates.
I'm going to jump ahead to something that might be potential agreement then, okay?
Okay, yeah, sure.
So basically, if you're saying that Since the early 20th century, we had a privatized system that was better. The federal government stepped in during a time of great economic depression. That's kind of when a lot of this, got cemented into the American fabric. You can say
the two aren't necessarily connected, but they happen at similar times. Yeah.
Sure. But basically, the reason why I'm resistant as somebody who is pro welfare, I guess you could say in some way, that it would be better if we went back to the lodge system or we went back to the fraternal order system. Okay.
Yeah.
Do it. But here's the thing.
Well, it's illegal, and the government is providing these services with taxes.
It's illegal for you to become a part of the Masons, and then as a part of the Masons or another fraternal society, it's impossible for you to pay dues into a system that gives you cheaper health care.
So what was made illegal, and what is is it illegal to do that? You're right. It's not technically illegal to engage in that services.
Yeah, we could do
but
that.
It is illegal
for Tim Cast healthcare program.
It is illegal for them to own hospitals. It is illegal for them to negotiate for doctor salaries without following specific rates set by the government. It is illegal there's massive loopholes and regulations in the healthcare industry, right? It is the most regulated industry in America is healthcare and drugs, right? So the government stepping in on behalf of doctors because healthcare costs were too cheap, and they were under threat because in Pennsylvania, Michigan, California, Maine, and Vermont, doctors associations and medical associations were doing everything they could to get rid of these people. Now, you said you want to tie it to the culture, and here's the thing: is that what was the healthcare lodge doing? It wasn't just giving people insurance. It wasn't just giving people their medical care. What it was doing is it was communally bringing men together to discuss when Bob lost his job, everybody would go to the lodge and they would say hell, Bob lost his job. Anybody know anybody that can hire? There was a communal aspect of mutual aid.
But this gets into, sure. And I love mutual aid. I love community. I love all the things that you're talking about. But the thing is, what I think Tim jumped to, which would be my point, is that we had something pre-World War II, which was the Great Depression, which was like a insane economic moment. We're probably experiencing one of those insane economic moments now. We did experience an insane economic moment in 2008. And the truth is that the fraternal orders were not enough in order to deal with it. So there was public outcry. Hey, there's old people starving. Hey, there's young people starving. Hey, there's people who can't get medical care. We need a bigger organization in order to step in order to provide these services.
Let me fail.
I'll tell you. I want to ask a follow-up question.
Okay.
Sure.
What's wrong with leaving the elderly to their own devices?
They're going to die horribly.
Right. What's wrong with it?
I like old people.
So what is the logical reason? What is the functional mechanical reason that we should create a government system to protect the lives of individuals who are unable to take their own?
Yes. Okay. So you're going to have to give me a little bit of latitude. Okay. All right. So this is part of my problem with libertarianism. This is part of my problem with individualism. I'm not a collectivist. I'm a communitarian. I think there's a balance between the individual and the collective. Okay? We are not born alone. We are born with nurses, doctors, family members taking care of us. We also do not die alone. Ideally, we have doctors, nurses, family members taking care of us as we die. And so what would happen in a healthy, reciprocal society is that we would say that we know we are born. We know that we die. We know there's a whole thing in between. We want to make every single aspect of a human life the best that it maximally can be at every step of the way. Therefore, we're not just talking about rights. We're also talking about responsibilities. And so one of the responsibilities, I have grandparents. They have passed on now. One of the responsibilities of children is to see their parents out in a good way. One of the responsibilities of a community is to take care of old people when they're on their way out.
Okay, can I respond to that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that you just said, which is why you should abolish Social Security and go back to private systems.
Pass.
And so let me explain, right? The best data that we have, because we're not looking at elderly poverty rates until we're not tracking most things until the establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913, right? So economic data is scarce, right? But the best that we have, you can look up. Cato Institute did a piece on this, support of the elderly before the Depression, right? And if you want to look up more about fraternal societies, read David T. Beddoes' book, From Mutual Aid to the Welfare State, Fraternal Services and Social Services, 1890 to 1967. That's where most of this stuff is coming from, right? But we know from internal surveys, the best stuff that we can find, right? That elderly poverty, where people were in need of assistance, depending upon the different groups and societies, it looks like it's somewhere between 10 to 20% of elderly were in desperate need of help. Okay. Now in 1935, when we established the Social Security Act, right? It's April, I believe. Elderly poverty rate was about 40%. Okay, so during the Great Depression, you're right, things got so much worse. Now, of course, fraternal societies were being already shut out, destroyed, overregulated by about 1910 is when they really start coming in, pushing them out. Things get worse. But of course, the Great Depression occurred as well. Now, the claim to fame of people that say, well, Social Security has helped us so much is that between 1935 to 1960, it fell from 40% to about 35%. And then from 1960 to 1995, it went down to 10%. And now, today, it's at 11.3%. So the claim to fame is that elderly poverty, as we are now $37 trillion in debt and counting, as we have destroyed community and destroyed the natural provider role of men, destroyed communal bonds, created Anomy, fucked up gender roles, moved wealth from young men, made it impossible for them to build wealth to, single moms, to the elderly, to all of these other institutions. Their claim to fame is it took us 100 years and we got ever so slightly better than what it was right before and during the Great Depression. That's fucking insane.
Why?
That's insane.
Why? You just literally said that it went from...
It took them 100 years to get right where they fucking started, that they fucked up. And by the way, the social consequences and the debt consequences have been horrendous.
But hold on, I reject this, okay?
What do you reject?
I reject the fact that 100 years ago, the fraternity and community bonds of America were, magical and better and like all this kind of crap. I fundamentally...
didn't make that argument. I made a factual argument that 1 and 3... I made a factual argument.
I don't care. I've been listening to you basically run us through the history of the early 20th century fraternal orders versus the welfare state, okay? Mm-hmm. So what I'm arguing is that all these things that we're talking about, the lack of community, the lack of fraternity, mm-hmm. The dissolution of gender roles, which by the way I think is what I want to talk about a little bit more, is the fact that we are responsible for this. You are. I am. Tim is. These young men over here.
Hey, don't look at me. I got nothing to do with it.
No, you do. You do. You're a part of this. So whether or not we want, for instance, there's just like a anarchist concept of basically creating parallel structures to the state in order to evaporate the state's power. Mm-hmm. If you want to talk all this smack about how the welfare state is destroying society or whatever, then what you would do if you were a rich person, not that you have a whole lot of money in your checking account, but you would take that money and you would put it into creating parallel structures in order to evaporate this power. But what I hear and see consistently from very rich people who complain about these problems is they don't put their money where their mouth is. They don't give a shit about community. They don't care about creating parallel structures in order to dissolve the power of the state. They just no offense to, any particular streamer, but streamers mostly just jerk off and make money and spend money how they please.
Okay, but your argument is if you believe this, or if libertarians as a whole are right, like why aren't we creating parallel systems,
that evaporate the power of the state? If you gave a shit, then that's what you would do.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. Number one, right? 15.2% of all the money that you should be making is immediately stolen from you out of every paycheck, so that you can just for Social Security.
I reject the word stolen, but continue.
Well, I didn't fucking choose to have them take my money.
Okay,
stolen.
I'm going to use a Stevenism. Okay, no.
What the fuck is a Stevenism?
Oh, sorry. I'm gonna use a phrase from another creator. Okay, there is no thief that breaks into your house and takes 15% of your paycheck and then gives you something in return. There's no thief that does that. So it's fundamentally a different social phenomena.
Okay, so
what? Can you elaborate what that means?
Yeah, sure. So taxes. It's very popular with libertarians to say that taxation is theft because it's not voluntary, right?
They didn't choose it. They just took it.
So what I would say is that we are effectively, in my opinion, we are in the new Rome. Okay, we are in Rome. We run a $70 trillion global commercial empire. And as a result, we get all these incredible benefits. We have access to worldwide petroleum. We have access to plastic goods. We have access to the entire world market. And so as a result, you can't calculate the benefits that you have. This entire room is covered in plastic and electronics that have been manufactured the world over. Nobody gave this to you. This is a function of the international security network that is the federal government.
Well, so I have a question.
Go ahead, yeah.
In the context of taxation being theft or being taken from you,
Right.
why don't you go and live somewhere where you don't have to pay that?
Like where? Where would you like me to go?
Western Somalia, Southern Sudan.
Why don't I go to a failed state? Well, it's very simple.
Or
right?
let's I don't know, West Africa.
Okay, so first of all, I have children here.
State like that,
right? I have children. So for this analogy, let's assume I don't have children, right?
Yeah.
Why the fuck should I leave my ancestral homeland? Why the fuck should
This isn't you that came here 300 years ago.
No. I'm a mutt, okay?
I have a question.
I don't have, I'm part Lebanese, I'm part, okay.
We'll address the first question. Because trees were planted whose shade that our ancestors knew they would never sit beneath, and you are requested that as you were born into that society, you keep watering those trees.
But again, I mean,
you can leave.
We can. Yes, I want. I plant seeds of which the shade I will never.
No.
sit
What
in.
I'm saying is your ancestral homeland, and I'm trying to answer your question and get your answer. People came here. They built infrastructure. They said, "Son, when you are old, you must take care of what we have built for you." You are born into this world. And the same imposition is applied. Look at all of this infrastructure. Look at the bridges that were built. We want you to pay into it. You have a choice. You could say, not interested. I don't want it. I'll leave.
No, I'm fighting for this place. I'm fighting to make this place, America, better. And the best way that you can do that is to fight to get the government that is stealing so much money and funneling it to, I don't know, condoms in Africa somewhere instead of actually.
Why is condoms in Africa a bad thing?
Because it's not here.
Well,
because we have people.
Wait. Let me just address that by using the exact.
Sorry for using.
Hold on.
Just to address the exact same point I just made.
Sorry, Ma.
Because when our ancestors planted trees and said, "Please water this," the implication wasn't, and also you're gonna have to go to Africa and water their trees too.
Okay. Now we're getting into the fight. Okay.
No. Listen. Hold on.
Because I don't want to talk about early 20th century fraternal societies. I want to talk about this. Okay.
I know. You didn't do your research, so you want to talk about you want to do a basic wing it thing because you're used to arguing against libertarian philosophy, and I actually came prepared with historical, psychological.
Well, dude, I didn't sign up for a 2-hour conversation about the early 20th century. I wanted to talk about whether or not the welfare.
I want to talk about welfare.
Modern woman.
Yeah, and so we have to talk about what came before.
No, we don't. We can talk about it now.
You make the claim. I'll be very clear.
I want to go. I listened to you for a prolonged period. I want to go.
You make the claim that we all called for this and that these things are necessary. And the reason I'm talking about that historical analysis is because the history proves that's not fucking true. We did it better and cheaper before when people were mostly agricultural farmers. That's why I'm bringing up the history.
The reason why, sorry, real quick. This is why I don't care, is because your historical time period is a time in which the rural doctor would either amputate your leg or not amputate your leg because you had gangrene, right? They didn't have penicillin. They didn't have anything anywhere close to the medical technology that we have. So you're like, our society is more complex and more expensive. It's like, yeah, no shit. Well, because
but that's not an argument.
He's not amputating your leg for 5 cents.
That's not an argument.
Yes, it is. Morphine in a hacksaw costs infinitely less than an MRI machine.
And so does the value of labor of the average American citizen. Yes, things get more complicated. People make more money.
Sure, so I don't care.
Of labor.
I don't think your historical analogies
agricultural
apply.
farmers obvioly had access.
I don't think your historical analogies apply, and I don't care.
Than people do today.
I want to move into the 20th century.
Medical care is more expensive. You're not.
Let's do this. The first thing I want to add, totally unrelated.
African condoms.
I find it funny that it really was like cut the leg off or not when they could have just poured whiskey over the wound. And like they didn't understand the concept of antiseptics. Like,
sure,
you literally have a thing of rum or moonshine.
Yeah,
pour the alcohol on the leg, and you don't got to cut it off.
What they didn't know, didn't know.
So it's upon the context, but yeah, sure.
So let's.
I don't want to get into the history of medical.
Can I briefly address African condoms?
Sure.
Okay. So the whole point is that when we have access to, if we're the new Rome, if we're the global empire, if we have access to all these exterior markets, then the easiest way to get into these markets is by exuding soft power. In West and East Africa and South Africa, there are problems like HIV, lack of parental figures in the home, et cetera, et cetera. And so condoms, you can get to them for cents on the dollar, and you are helping them build up their societies. So what happens is when South Africa, East Africa, West Africa have minerals, they have gold, they have oil, they have whatever, they're like, oh, the Americans gave us access to contraception so we could build a better society. We'll sell it to them at a reasonable rate.
That is the most.
That is cents on the dollar.
That is the most beautiful. That is the most beautiful
I would love to hear your rebuttal.
interpretation of how the State Department does foreign policy.
Okay, wait.
Like, holy shit! Those
I
are
also
rose-
like hard power.
beautiful sunglasses
Guys,
you're wearing there.
The first thing we have to address is, are we being literal in that the State Department has been delivering condoms to Africa?
We're talking about USA.
Yes.
But
USA
is USAID, is there a specific program you're referencing where they literally said, let's
Yes.
bring these condoms to
Yes,
Africa?
I think it's literally Gaza, Mozambique. It was the
yes, it's
50,000
Gaza, Mozambique. So
I know
listen-
about the Gaza one.
Right. I mean, like, right.
But that wasn't
I don't-
Gaza. That was
this
Gaza,
isn't-
Mozambique, I think.
This is So
We'd have
this
to
isn't obviously the topic, right? But when you're a libertarian, you have to
talking
be
about welfare.
right. You have to be prepared to have little turns aside, right? So yeah, we're talking about USAID. We're talking about the very thing that is, the very first target of Doge for a fucking reason, because it is full of waste.
You mean USAID, not USAID.
Well, it's you can call it either one. I understand.
The reason
AID is an acronym and it's not actually aid. Like I'm with you, right?
Because, I just say that
Just say it because it's quicker.
But what happens often is I end up talking to people and they think you're referring to general foreign aid policy versus an institution that was doing a variety of issues. Like
No, what we are talking about is we're talking about one of many programs that is enmeshed with the State Department, the CIA, corporate interests, et cetera, that want to push, Western liberal democracy to all of these other nations. And they kind of don't care how much they fuck up those countries, fuck up our economy, steal money from us, make the world a less safe place, so long as the Belt and Road Initiative doesn't get there first.
I want to give a shout out to Danny. I want to give a shout out to Danny Polishchuk, who made a sketch when Doge was ripping apart USAID. He did a fake 60 Minutes interview where he said that he's responsible for making foreign countries gay against their will.
Sure.
Right.
No, but okay, and shout out to Danny. I love Danny. I literally retweet every single thing that I see. No, so as an example, like you could point to these things. We're talking about hard power, soft power, and I don't care if we bring it back to welfare and the modern woman. That's fine. But
The topic, you mean?
We should.
okay,
The topic, yeah.
But real quick, if we're talking about like foreign welfare in order to build soft power with these countries, one of the things that USAID got in trouble for was creating a social media app in the state of Cuba in order to help in order to help foster pro-democracy, revolutionary sentiment in the state of Cuba. Well, guess what? Cuba's a communist country. They're right off of our border. They wanted nukes from Russia. They wanted to blow us up 70 years ago. And I generally speaking think that freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, democracy, and all that stuff is good.
All right.
Why do I care?
So I actually.
You think that's good?
Real quick, just. I'm not a big fan of foreign intervention, but if you were to come to me and make that argument, I'd be like, it's interesting. The only issue is that U.S. foreign policy has been more interested in turning countries into gay race communists than actually bringing them to democracy.
Okay, listen.
No,
Sorry, if you want to, I kind of feel like I got to address that. But
well, no, hold on. I'll address it probably almost the same way that you would, right? So first of all, the Zunizeo thing, the problem is, right, even if you're not a libertarian like me, right, and you're willing to pay some taxes for soft power or for whatever reason, right?
Sure.
Is that it's fraud because they lied, right? They said they didn't.
Whom?
They lied to the American taxpayer. They lied to everyone, right? Like this money for Zunizeo that was broken by the AP in 2015, I believe. None of this was in any documents. It was leaked, right? It was a whistleblower that showed that we were doing covert operations in trying to take over dictatorships. And we're doing it under the guise of U.S. aid, which obviously Tim Pool pointed out is USAID, right? Which it's layers of bullshit to make people think that they're doing humanitarian work when really what they're paying for with their taxes is to try and topple government somewhere and to create conflict and strife in other places because they are fucking commies. Like, look, I hate commies too, but I don't understand why I can't get my fucking roads fixed because our government has to hide behind
why
layers
don't you
of
create a
secrecy
fraternal
to try
organization and then
create some
pitch
shit.
in order to repave your roads?
Because they
You could do it
steal
so
my
great.
fucking money to try and
Oh my God,
overthrow
you have
Cuba.
more money than $10. You're fine. So anyways, the point is that like one of the words that you said that I think is like pertinent to what you just said is covert. Okay. Not every single thing that the government does, they're going to be like, hey, we're going to go topple the government of Cuba now. It's like, no, they're going to operate through soft power organizations in order to spread pro-democracy messaging. That's not a problem.
No,
for
that's
me.
a serious fucking problem. That's a serious problem when the budget says this money's for U.S. aid and it's to help people. Okay, if you love that, listen, if you love that shit so much, then just have the CIA get the actual amount of money that they use and then say, like, look, we can't tell you what it's for, but this is how much money we have. And all of a sudden, people will be like, that's too much fucking money.
So the question is for you, the American people largely don't know about these black budget operations, and sometimes they're not overtly black budget. Why doesn't the U.S. explicitly tell its American people, we are going to take your tax dollars for use in overthrowing the government of Cuba?
I think we vaguely do. I think this information is all available. And on top of that, like people criticize like neoconservatives for... I don't know why you're laughing.
I'm laughing because a whistleblower had to prove it, and you're like, but we do say it. It's like, no, obviously
what do you think that,
not true because
yes,
they didn't tell us that.
Oh, because USAID used soft power as a backdoor for the CIA in order to try to topple a communist government? Does the CIA have to disclose all of its operations to you? Because I'm pretty sure that like defeats the purpose of like a secret intelligence organization that spies on foreign agencies.
What I said is,
so hold on.
What I said is,
asked me a question and I want to answer
give them a fucking budget if you agree with it so much.
He asked me a question and I want to answer it. So you said that the American people weren't consulted on this. Every single time that we have a neoconservative, which I guess I'm a little bit of it, I'm like a rhino neocon a little bit, we have neocon people who say, I love democracy. I love republicanism. I love freedom of conscience. I love freedom of speech. And we're going to go to war with all the dictators of the world. We have that all the time. Nikki Haley says that. Plenty of Republicans say that all the time.
Do you think the American people are aware of just how much money goes into toppling foreign governments?
Well, they should probably Google it because it's all available.
I mean, it's not.
It's not.
It's all Googleable,
what's not
bro.
Available? What's not? Please tell me what like secret operation or overt operation we are unaware of at this time.
I'm sorry. Are you asking me to tell you the thing that the government has hidden from me?
So as an example,
are you fucking retarded right now?
No, I'm not. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to give you an example. So when we're talking about Ukraine, we know about Ukraine. When we're talking about Libya, we know about Libya. When we're talking about Syria, we know about Syria. You can't tell me, probably even Sudan. I have friends who work in like the Sudanese issue. They work for these people, and it's all relatively open. Like the United States doesn't know who to support in Sudan because the military and the jihadists are both bad.
You think that's
available?
But classification exists.
Of course.
So there's things we don't know about.
Sure. Okay. Like we bombed Yemen a few times. Okay, but you can find that we bombed Yemen.
I would love to get back on the topic, but I'll just say this, right? Because I feel like my point was missed. If you are a genuine believer that the State Department and CIA needs to exert soft power, right? And needs to use, money in some regard that we don't know about, right? And you believe that the people would support it and that would be okay because you believe in democracy and these things need to be done, then you don't need dark money. You can literally just say, hey, look, here's a bank account. Here's our budget. We're doing covert shit, but this is how much money we need for covert shit. So we can't tell you what it's for. What they don't need to do is lie to people and say that this is humanitarian aid, and then they're actually doing it with the State Department and working with other people clandestine.
Let's get into the issue of the modern woman. Otherwise, I think we've gone from the welfare state. Now we're talking about
it happens every time
overthrowing Cuba.
Welcome to bringing an anarcho-capitalist on. All right.
So let's start here. What is the modern woman in your view?
I don't want to answer that question because I think that a lot of people have like really stereotypical notions of what the modern woman is. I think there's plenty of mildly traditional women. So I would prefer it if he answered the question about what the modern woman is.
What is the modern woman?
Yeah, I would actually ask for that's going to be difficult.
Okay, I'll jump on the grenade. I'll jump on the grenade.
No, I don't I'll do it, right? But the problem is like the modern woman.
I'll answer it for you.
If I want to do it, so if I want to do it within the context of the conversation that we're having, right? What I would say is that the modern woman is someone that is affected deeply by Anomy, someone that is a person with so many choices that it is a crippling level of choices, that they lack cultural norms and they lack the guardrails that previous generations had so that they could actually achieve their goals and be happy and content.
So I won't get into stereotypes. I'll just tell you that the 70% of millennial females vote for the Democratic Party and support the party agenda, which is defined as strong welfare state, what we would describe as social justice or intersectional issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a smaller portion of the modern women believes in traditional family conservative values.
Yeah.
So it's usually to say that they are more goal and career oriented than in the past, modern women of today, as opposed to 100 years ago, and more politically active and more left economic leaning and left cultural leaning.
Sure. And I think we can point to a variety of reasons for why that would be, particularly when we're in the day and age. And by the way, like, I'm not pro-abortion. I'm relatively speaking like anti-abortion. But when we're talking about like boiling down modern binary politics into subjects, I care about guns. Okay. I love the Second Amendment. I think, I believe in it wholeheartedly. So when every time that the Democrats threaten the Second Amendment, I become more right wing. Well, within the past decade or two, we've had Republicans not only openly threaten like birth control, Roe versus Wade, all that kind of stuff. We had them succeed. They effectively achieved one of the greatest social conservative victories in the past 50 years. So I'm not surprised that women are jumping left. They're doing it in reaction to the right.
I suppose you could argue it's not a victory if you lose a battlefield and reclaim it. It's technically a victory, but you're still net zero.
I guess. I don't know where we really want to take it from here. I would probably
a conservative victory would be the abolishment of abortion.
A social conservative victory would be the abolition of abortion.
Abolition.
I agree. Yeah, 100%. But the point is that we live in a society. We're in a democratic republic. There's a whole bunch of different tribes that all vie over how to live, in the future. And I think that women are advocating in their own self-interest, which makes sense. If you want, this is something that I thought about. I disagree with it, but conceptually I understand it. Men, relatively speaking, have bodily autonomy. There's a reduced ability for us to get raped and murdered because we have a larger capacity for violence, in my opinion. With women, you're almost at constant threat through the society that you could be raped, you could be physically abused, you can do this, you can do that. And so you're constantly surrounded by potential threats. And one of the ways that you can assert control is that if somebody rapes you and impregnates you, then you can assert control over whether or not you can carry out that pregnancy. So that might feel like some level of control in a potentially hostile society. So that's probably why they want to grab onto it as like a measure of control. While I still disagree with it.
Yeah. Going back to just the entirety of the conversation, my thought is why does the state have to do these things? You mentioned that people should take care of their elderly. Women should be protected from these instances of rape and things like this. Why do you feel it's the state's job or not individuals?
This gets back to the Leviathan, right? Power abhors a vacuum, and there will always be abuses. Human beings are naturally self-interested, selfish creatures, and so there's always going to be abuse. There's always going to be neglect. There's always going to be malevolence. The state has the ability to step in and assert some level of justice.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things I want to get into. So, I don't necessarily disagree with you that women have the perception of a lack of bodily autonomy. Obviously Roe v. Wade. I don't like that kind of univariate analysis of a policy. Yeah, I'm sure it had, a swing towards, Gen Z being more in favor of the Democrats, et cetera. But I think this problem is so much deeper, and I connect it to welfare, right? I think welfare is the predominant issue with the breakdown of gender issues within our country. So what is the traditional role of men in most societies, right? It is a provider-protector role. When we look at evolutionary psychology work in terms of attraction, we can look at David Buss's work in the evolution of desire, right? And, he kind of puts forward that kind of gender theory or that social role that you often hear from a lot of podcasters, even though they're not sure that they're referencing it, which is that, men tend to be attracted to females for fertility signs, right? Women tend to be attracted to men for signs of resource provision, right? There's other work in terms of Simon Cohen's extreme male brain theory of autism, which is a fairly controversial work with a lot of citations. And he breaks it down as females tend to work towards empathizing and men tend to work towards systematizing, right? Men look at tools, they look at hierarchy, they look at how to do things with things. Women look at maintaining relationships, things of that nature. And so what happens when your society utilizes the state and takes away all of the community aspects, right? All of the interconnectedness, all of the social capital out of the male role of being a provider, out of the social safety net that men did for so long, and then funnels that to women. Well, I'll tell you what happens. What you end up with is young men who cannot have capital accumulation because the government takes their money now. They can't invest. They have less money to invest. They have less money to build wealth. They don't have the women are no longer seeking them to be providers. They're boss bitches. They're independent. They have their own money. But half of the money that everybody is making is taxed in some degree to move towards other people. It has completely destroyed the natural dynamics in gender in those relationships.
A specific example that came up quite a bit in the past few years was a study that came out and a subsequent story by the New York Post that women are struggling to find men who will date them who make as much. And
absolutely.
The issue is actually quite simple. If there's a 35-year-old man who makes $70,000 a year, he's not going to date a 35-year-old woman. He's going to date a 22-year-old woman because that amount of money to a 22-year-old is more.
Sure.
And so we've seen this phenomenon with dating apps in particular, where young men are cut out of the dating market because, as the story goes, your dating pool used to be your sphere of influence, your friends, your schools, whatever, your work.
Now it's
and so
internet.
Now it's everything. So what happens is a 22-year-old guy at a university, his dating pool is 22-year-old girls or, freshmen, 18 to 22.
Sure.
And the women, their dating pool is the men. But with the rise of social media, women, those young men in college are now competing with 30-year-old guys who make, $80,000 a year.
Yep.
And when it's actually quite simple. The young woman gets a message from a guy and he says, "Do you want to come hang out in my dorm with my buddies? We're going to order pizza." And she goes, "That sounds fun." She gets another message from a 30-year-old guy says, "How about I pick you up in my convertible? We go out for a movie and a dinner and then go drive by the lake."
Sure.
Which one does she choose? She's going to choose the more fun, more luxurious adventure.
Yeah.
The result has been that right now, the highest rate of virginity for men 30 and under and increasing. This was actually in the past 5 years. So now the virginity rate up to 35 is about 1/3. And these are not guys who are, Seamus Coughlin, he's a Catholic. He responded with based when he heard that. Because he's Catholic.
Come on, Seamus.
Can I just point out real quick, though?
Just
it's
one final.
Females, too.
One final, but less so. So the final point is, what I told Seamus was, these are not guys who are waiting for marriage. These are guys who are cut out from finding a partner at all because of. So I guess
incels. They're not volcels.
But these are just regular guys.
Sure.
It's not some weird nerdy guy.
I can explain this.
Let's go.
I can explain this without a univariate analysis, but I'll let you go first.
Thank you. So you tied it to welfare, and I basically I want to address your point, and then I want to get into this because I feel like this is the meat. It's what people came for, so to speak. You wanted to tie it to welfare. Well, in preparation for this conversation, I went ahead and took a look at like international welfare, the different states that have different issues, and it seems like every single country on the planet is facing similar issues. Increases in single-family homes. They are experiencing a birth rate that is plummeting towards 2. There are all the antisocial programs, antisocial issues of like violence and all that kind of stuff. This is happening like worldwide. And then looking at developed countries versus non-developed countries or developing countries, so to speak, welfare didn't really correlate with whether or not people were experiencing these sexual issues. As an example, Mexico and Costa Rica have some of the lowest GDP spent on welfare. They also have the per capita rate is incredibly low, and they still experience these sexual I'll call it dysgenic issues, right? But then you also go to places like Germany or Norway or Sweden, and what's funny is these countries have more welfare, but they actually have moderately less dysgenic issues compared to the United States. And so I would still agree to all of these problems, but I wouldn't tie it to welfare. And the things that I would tie it to, which you guys mentioned, is the Industrial Revolution, the sexual revolution, and I would say we are currently in the information age revolution, where you can, as an example, like you just said, you can date, you're not dating your community, you could date the entire city, the entire state.
Okay, so
worse than that, you can date robots.
Right.
Okay, so let me respond to that. So you're absolutely true. Anyone that tries to do like I said, a univariate analysis on anything is a snake oil salesman, or they don't know what they're talking about, right? Like nothing is ever one issue.
Sure.
Right. My issue is the growth of the state supplanting cultural norms, right? So there's so to weave this thread, I got to get into a little bit more psychology, right? So, obviously I brought up Durkheim, right? He wrote Division of Labor, 1893, or Division of Labor and Society, 1893. And then later his most famous work probably is Suicide, 1897, right? Where he discusses the concept of anomy, right? He was the first guy to discover that,
Can you define anomy, because you've said it 2 or 3 times and I've
so an anomy is a sense of normlessness when culture changes or institutions change too fast and people they're less understanding of what is expected of them and what the standard ought be.
Sure.
Right? And so, there's a lot that goes into this, right? So you can look at Robert K. Merton's kind of work, right, in structural functionalism. You don't hear much about structural functionalism because it's the only conservative aspect of sociology, right? So obviously they don't talk about it, right? But he's the guy that invented broken windows theory. He's the guy that coined the phrase unintended consequences, right? And so, there is, when you have welfare that supplants communities, that supplants, it supplants social capital, right? When you said this, and you're absolutely right, that power and systems, right, they abhor a vacuum, right? And you're absolutely right. When the government steps in, they take in that space, right? And what they have supplanted is social capital. They have supplanted neighbors looking after their neighbors' kids because that was necessary at one time. Because if you didn't belong to a society, you didn't, like a fraternal society, obviously we belong in a society, right? But if you weren't a part of these groups, if you weren't active member of your community, if you didn't have a church, you didn't have all these things, then people would be left out. Your life would suck, but problems would cause. And what we've done is we've given that over to the state. And what this has done is destroyed the social capital that gives us norms, right? I'm going to use a little metaphor to kind of make this simple, right? If I live in a society that says 1 through 10 are bad things and you shouldn't do those bad things, right? But I'm really fucking good at number 7. And I'm talented and I really care about number 7. What I do is I break norms and I go do number 7 and I do it so fucking good that I come back with number 7 and I go, look at the value that I have done with number 7. But when you have a society that says, do whatever you want, be free, there are no cultural norms, multiculturalism is great, there is no community, you don't know who your neighbors are, you go off and you do 7, but you get distracted by, well, should I do 1 or should I do 10? And then what you end up with is you suck and you're engaged in all these degenerate things that should have kept a cohesive society together. And no one cares when you come back.
Real quick. So are you saying that the system of welfare has enabled damage to our cultural and social structures?
Absolutely. Not only enabled, it has created, without a doubt.
But your argument would be industrialization and technological revolution
sexual revolution and information
is the culprit of that.
So think about this. How is that possible? How do you get sexual revolution, hedonism, equity, feminism, right? These things coincide. It's a chicken and egg scenario because the women, as we said, like I said, men are systematizing, women are empathizing. As you said, women are voting, especially Gen Z, are 70% Democrat. Women are voting for welfare systems that empower women.
Okay,
the DEI. What does DEI do except give women useless email jobs in corporations?
Women are allowed to vote for these things.
Yeah, because we have it's liberalism. So, and by the way, liberalism.
Well, democracy's dumb, but that's a separate point.
Right. So, liberalism, I think, is a perfectly fine, especially in a free society. I think it's a perfectly fine governing society or governing philosophy. However, I think it's a very terrible, personal development philosophy. I don't think it gives you enough information on how to be a man, how to be a woman, how to grow up, how to be a good person, et cetera, et cetera. Liberalism should be a general governing framework, but we should be fighting within the framework of liberalism for how men should grow up. And so, and also how women should grow up as well. I'm going to give you a rebuttal to one of your points, and then I'm going to talk about a solution, I guess. So you said that the government is in here stealing 15 to 10% of our checks or whatever, and therefore
that's just Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Just give me a moment.
Social Security, Medicare.
So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid entitlement programs are stealing all of our resources, and therefore we don't have enough capital in order to develop ourselves, in order to become men, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, since power abhors a vacuum, this was all happening in the 90s. 19th century. And you can go back and find the abuses in the late 19th and early 20th century from capitalists. And I don't mean that as a derogatory term. I mean that from the people who ran corporations. The people who ran corporations, similar to Google, except for maybe Google's a little bit nicer, is they created like compounds for workers to live in. And then they charged them exorbitant rents for their living conditions. Then they charged them exorbitant rates for the food consumption items that they had at the local grocer. And they also made the locals sign contracts saying that they would purchase all of their goods first from the local grocer. And so while it's private and it's privately negotiated, power seems to, especially nefarious power, seems to always want to manipulate its subordinates into giving every excess amount of energy into the above system. Anybody who's sorry, I'm ranting, but I'll try to be brief. Any person who's worked in corporate America understands this. And the reason why is because they give you bullshit metrics that you have to fulfill every single day. That takes all of your energy. That way you basically give your soul to the company. And if you're unwilling to give your soul to the company, they drum you out.
Okay, so can I have a direct refutation of this very quickly?
Sure, yeah.
Right, so Hayek has a wonderful quote that in The Road to Serfdom that I think accurately depicts the counter argument here, which is just centralized systems destroy spontaneous order.
Thank you.
Right? You're not wrong that evil people have existed and done bad things or done it. Now, I do think that your characterization is a little like lefty of like, some of these corporations, right? I mean, like
the problem with being a centrist.
Well, I think it's a little silly because, specifically when we're talking about Pullman Town, I think is what you're mostly referencing. We're talking about the grocery store. There's that famous quote from where, he says, I live in a Pullman house. I work a Pullman job. I eat Pullman food. And when I die, I'm going to be buried in a Pullman coffin. Yep. Right? Like that is like this very bleak and dystopian thing, except the people there were making like, relative to the average American, were making double, sometimes triple the wages of other people. Their children were getting education that agrarian farmers could never have gotten. They did have a home. Those homes were showcases some of this, like the brilliant age of capitalism, because these homes were nicer than any homes any regular poor people could fit.
Well,
now, were there
Google
problems?
Would be saying the same thing though. Google would be like, "Look at the great. We have a sushi bar, guys.
I
we got
agree.
this.
Listen,
we got that."
I agree that corporations took advantage of the large amount of capital that they had, to make more and more. Like, I agree that there are always going to be bad people in any system. But what I am talking about and what I am arguing is not here some examples of bad things happen in past, therefore welfare good. I'm making an actual argument here, right? Which is that I'm talking about from a praxeological position, looking at the economic impact of creating a society where the government takes your money now for a presumed good elsewhere. So there's a couple of issues here. It prioritizes.
I want to have a back and forth. I don't want to listen to like
you went on a rant, and I want to make the argument, so I'll try and make it quick here. Right? There's a couple of issues: resource accumulation versus capital accumulation versus capital consumption.
Sure.
When you have welfare, who gets welfare? It is the immediate needs and the welfare recipients of the state. When you don't have welfare, where does money go? Sometimes it goes towards presumed immediate needs. Sometimes it goes towards wealth and investment. One of the worst things that welfare has done is it has taken away capital accumulation from young men. What do young men normally do? They start factories. They start small businesses. They go into industries that compete with corporations, and they're able to do that, but they need that wealth accumulation.
Not
Their
anymore.
role is destroyed by welfare and immediately given to other people, and it has destroyed what young men do. So of course, they fucking check out and play video games and work a 9 to 5.
So welfare is a component, I suppose, but the issue is largely the regulatory nature of the country.
Oh, for sure.
The capital requirements to start a business.
For sure.
And the structures as of right now. An 18-year-old is not going to be able to stake a plot of land and create a farm. He's not going to be able to do anything, actually, because he's competing with older, more skilled people. He's competing with literally everybody. Mm-hmm. So what do we end up seeing?
Welfare. This is welfare.
Welfare is just one piece of the big picture.
But when we look at inflation,
Fabian, Scott, Jesus, I love you.
He was looking at me. I was going to answer. Okay. I was so excited because I have the answers.
I know. But here's
all of them,
brother. All of them.
We all have the answers. Okay. So the thing about this is, number one, we do live in a democratic republic. Women do have representation. They're not going to be interested in stopping the way that they're voting anytime soon. This is oftentimes my problem.
Sure, that's not an argument.
No, it is. Obviously, it's important. We're talking about ideology and shoulds. One of the shoulds that you should consider is whether or not you would be able to affect society sufficiently.
It's not an argument about whether or not this is what
it's an appeal to pragmatism. Please let me finish.
That's not an argument.
Yes, it is. It literally is.
It really is.
Yeah, it really is. So anyways, the point is that if left-leaning people are going to continue voting the way that they're going to vote, it doesn't matter if you say we need to eliminate the welfare, we need to eliminate the power of the federal state. It's not going to happen. Okay, it's not going to happen. And so the question is, what do we do now? And the truth is that I think that even if you got what you wanted, which was like the evaporation of the welfare state, I still don't think that you would see the pro-social benefits that you're looking for because of the three other things that we mentioned: the industrial, sexual, and information revolution. And so now I'm talking about pragmatic solutions. When we're talking about pragmatic solutions, I hope that Valor Media Network, the people that I represent, are a part of the solution, which is that
you represent so many leftist organizations these days. Is that another one?
Well, they're liberals, but anyways,
I know you got paid by Progressive Victory and a bunch of other people. Don't keep hawking your shit, or I'm going to attack you for the fact that you take money from leftists. Like, calm down, brother.
Listen, man, I've never made it a hidden thing that I am a never Trumper. Okay,
I want to highlight one quick thing.
Sorry,
your point,
yeah, and it's a very simple point. Iron sharpens iron, men sharpen men. So we need to get together. We need to get our stuff together. We need to have these complex conversations, and we need to push each other to be better. And we need to help those 18 to 30-year-old men who are virgins right now.
Pragmatic solutions aside, that is not an argument as to whether or not did this thing cause this thing. So we've completely gone away from that argument.
We have a big functional problem in. One of the things that came up in the debate was welfare, the modern woman. Women overwhelmingly vote towards the left. Yeah. And I think there's, as you mentioned, they sympathize and men systematize. And so women take the approach of, we want to be protected. One argument made by many people is that they've effectively replaced the role of men with the state.
Yes.
So, however, that does create an interesting conundrum. Men allow women... men allowed the women to vote, essentially, and I don't mean to say that they had the right to restrict it in the first place. I'm saying that with women's suffrage, the men who are running the country could have simply said nope, but they decided no, women should vote. Here's the problem I have with the system we're currently in. If we were to remove all technologies, dating apps, industrialization, then all of these issues are solved. Certainly 50 billion new problems emerge. Right. You stub your toe and you die of sepsis.
Right, yeah, of course.
Thank you.
But in a society like that, where we live in the wilderness in little mud huts, women are largely going to defer to the men because the risks. These psychological tendencies have not gone away. They've just industrialized themselves to the point where women overwhelmingly right now are voting to send men to die. So with the current state,
yes,
it is true. The female vote tends to be exceedingly pro-war, and they themselves are exempt from the consequences of what those wars would be.
So, well, at first,
certainly, but the argument is, it's fine to vote in favor of war because I'm not on the front line. The men will have to die before I do.
True.
And so the argument still is, women rely on men for protection to maintain the society, but with voting power, the women can collectivize and then force the men to do things that men may not naturally do.
There's a Socratic quote about that. It's a gentleman. Sorry, it's a brief aside, but basically like a very powerful, wealthy, strong warrior gentleman in ancient Greece is talking smack about how democracy is the rule of the weak, and then Socrates or Plato, I forget who, but he basically rebuts. It's like, okay, well, if the weak bound together in order to become something stronger than you, then are we not still living in a society where effectively the strong are still ruling?
Indeed.
And so that's part of the reason why I'm not a Democrat, even though I'm temporarily working for Democrats because I hate Trump so much. But the point is, I'm not philosophically a Democrat because I think the average person, no offense to the Democrats in the audience, but they're mostly stupid. The average person is a moron.
I take issue with currently this is a problem. I believe that women should have the right to vote so long as they have equal responsibilities in society.
Selective service. So that's literally what I was going to say is that a lot of women joke about this, but I think that this would be actually, if we deem this a societal problem, I think this should be a thing. If we see consistently that women disproportionately vote for war for men to go die overseas or whatever, then I think that we need to make selective service equal, where all women over the age of 18 have selective service, because the truth is, you see TikToks all the time about gay men and women or whatever when they're like, oh, when the draft comes up, I'm going to pretend that that I'm something, blah, 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 blah. So I avoid war. But I want to bring this up because I think it's important. It's actually the heart of the conversation. Fabian, you're saying that the protect and provide role has been eliminated for young men. Okay.
Not
eliminated.
entirely.
It's substantively muted.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So here's the thing. When it comes to protection, protection involves a lot of things for young men. If you are not physically fit, if you don't have any cardiovascular ability, then nobody's going to trust you to protect them. If you are not capable of knowing the laws and knowing how to operate a firearm and knowing how to conduct yourself in like a hectic environment, then you're not going to be able to protect anyone.
Okay.
And I think that women subconsciously read on that. So what I would do if somebody gave me $1 million is I would literally create a program for young men to do for free in which we train them how to be physically fit, how to conduct themselves in security situations, how to conduct themselves during a mass shooting, how to do basic first aid, and how to operate firearms. I 100% would throw myself behind an educational effort in order to get young men educated on those topics. When it comes to provide, which protect could be partially financial as well, I'm just going to say we're fudged. So I think that we are at a crossroads in neoliberal economics and the welfare state, where male workers, middle class and working class males, have effectively had every dollar that they can make squeezed out of them, and you cannot bleed a stone. But I wouldn't put that solely on the state. I would also put that on the corporations, who also do very nefarious things to squeeze every ounce of productivity out of their peons while not giving them a living standard.
So let me respond to this. I don't know why I said that. Obviously, I'm going to respond to it. If I can word filler.
It's all good. We're getting into it. We're like 90 minutes in.
So I think there's you had talked about Temple, right? You had talked about the concept of like collectivizing, their control and of like resources and redistributing resources as they vote for the left. There's a few problems here. One is that your average woman, as much as your average man being dumb, right? They don't know that. Right? Like your average woman doesn't recognize that the entire system of the state is built to give her wealth and to give her security. They think men and women are equal because they've been told, bullshit about equality and equity, right? And they don't realize that like divorce laws are in their favor, family court laws are in their favor. You have literal politicians coming out and saying that like, how dare men sit on their couch and play video games? These welfare systems are built for single moms. It's like, fucking what? Like, what do you mean? Like, well, like, why ought young men be bled so that single moms can be, because the children, et cetera. But they're no longer connected to it. See, here, this is where it really gets down to the philosophy of what is a sacrifice and why that is such a meaningful difference between Social Security and like fraternal order societies, is that sacrifice is evil. Altruism is evil. Okay, it is absolutely evil when someone tells you that you need to give up what you have, not because you value something or that you value a person, be it your grandmother, your friend, someone that you know is on hard times, but because it is your moral duty to give up what you have earned and what you value for the better of society. It is the most evil thing that a person can say. It is the entire thesis of Atlas Shrugged. The idea that you must give up for welfare because poor people exist or because Africans have AIDS somewhere is evil.
Why? What the hell are you talking about?
Because you are sacrificing what it is that you value, what you care about, what you as a reasoned man have achieved through your success as the ability to be able to shape your world and your universe and your property for an amorphous person that you have absolutely no value or understanding of.
They're not amorphous. They're real flesh and blood human beings.
If they're real flesh and blood human beings and you value them, then absolutely, that's what fraternal order societies do. That's why we have the incentive structure of welfare it destroys work, it destroys value.
You just took like a really bold stance that I think we need to unpack.
Absolutely.
Okay? So
I will defend libertarian ideas and Ayn Rand. Absolutely.
Until you die, and it's going to be very frustrating. So hold on. So evil, to me, there's bad and there's evil. Okay, bad is negative consequence. Evil is knowing there will be negative consequence.
Absolutely.
And then continuing down that path.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, cool. Now, I'm probably evil from your regard, but I don't view myself as evil. Okay,
I'm not saying the totality of you as a person is evil, right?
Sure.
I'm saying when you say
actions or my advocacy,
that advocacy for that action is an evil act.
Things that are evil. Okay, so hold on. You said, why ought young men be bled? That is evil, and why must they give themselves to these broader institutions that they don't understand? The part of that I actually agree with is I think the modern institutions have done a terrible job. I cannot overstate this. Justifying the American commercial empire, justifying internationalism, justifying foreign war, justifying welfare. I think that our states have done almost no work whatsoever justifying the social institutions that presently exist to the next generation that must perpetuate them. And therefore, this entire generation of young men are saying, why? Why do I have to die in the Middle East and North Africa? Why do I have to be a part of selective service? Why do I have to work at Publix Publix is a grocery chain. Why do I have to work for $10 an hour, have 15% of my check taken when I could just sit at home, goof off and play video games and smoke pot and just do nothing, right? I understand why young men are saying why. But the truth is that I don't think that like suffering or sacrifice or altruism, for these institutions is bad. I think that you need to give them purpose. You need to give them a mission. You need to tell them why the United States is good, why freedom of conscience, why freedom of speech, why the Second Amendment, why the Fourth Amendment, why limited government is good, and you need to justify that effectively through propaganda.
Well, okay, hold on, you're selling. Okay, first of all, let's dispense with all of the things. Sorry, I'll get closer. Dispense of all the things that have nothing to do with welfare, like Second Amendment, First Amendment, and not actually on the topic. When you were saying we need to sell foreign wars and we need to sell your money and your ability to accumulate.
You want your computer, right?
Better so that we can give.
You want microchips, right?
No, that's like
you want Funko Pops, right?
No,
Actually, Funko Pops aren't doing too well.
People turn to those things. People turn towards materialism when you create a culture via the state and via Social Security and welfare of high time preference. When you take away resource accumulation and instead supplant it with capital accumulation, instead supplant it with capital consumption, right? You create a group of people that is materialistic, that just wants to buy the Funko Pop and the PlayStation, that doesn't have hopes of buying a home because every successive generation has destroyed the fucking market via asset inflation and Social Security, and we're $37 trillion of debt. Like, they have no purpose, and it's not because you haven't sold them a good enough purpose. It's because you're stealing their future.
Okay, but here's the thing. This is actually my frustration with the right. This is why I get pissed off at Republicans, is because they talk all this game about social conservatism, the family being the most important thing, all that kind of stuff. They're not going to enable any of it. They're going to use the same Darwinian fiscal conservative BS in order to slash the minimal social safety net that we have in order to screw people over even more. And as soon as they slash the social safety net, they're not suddenly going to be like, oh, hey, grocery store worker, suddenly I don't have to pay 20% taxes. I'm going to go ahead and include a dignified wage for you. That's never going to happen. So basically you have the corporations fleecing people. You have a government, according to you, fleecing people. I'm not necessarily saying that. And here's the thing is, guess what? It sucks to be a man, but that's what being a man is
being a man is not having to have your fucking wealth stolen by a fucking super state with guns.
No,
what the fuck are you talking about?
No. But it's giving your pear a tug and sucking it up and doing what's required anyways.
Yes, that is sacrifice. The very fucking evil I discussed.
Wait,
it's
sacrifice,
evil.
I can't
A man,
I can't understand if you're saying that sacrifice is evil or if you're saying that the government is saying sacrifice is evil. I can't tell.
Sacrifice is evil. That is what the government demands, and that is what people that justify
Why is
all of
sacrifice
these
evil? Sacrifice is one of the most fundamental human virtues on the planet.
Because you are giving up what you value for something that you do not value.
So that's not sacrifice.
Wait, so
that is sacrifice. Hold on,
so because I don't value blacks and women, I can just not pay taxes?
Pause. I'm using sacrifice from an objectivist perspective, not necessarily the way that we might use sacrifice colloquially, and I apologize. Right? When I say sacrifice, what I mean is that you are giving up something because you have a moral duty or responsibility, even though you don't want to give up something. When people are saying you need,
I call that growing up.
That is not growing up.
Yes, it is.
No, listen. You're not getting it. What I'm saying is that it's perfectly fine to give up something that you want now because you value what you will get later. It's perfectly fine to give up, but that's not what fucking Social Security is. It's saying give it up or you go to jail.
Well, sure. Hold on.
It's saying give it up or you go to jail so we can fund welfare queens and we can fund an economy that is consistently fucking you.
This is the point, though. Okay. I think that the state has done a terrible job of justifying its existence. And
If only they sold the involuntary theft better.
I think that old people eating cat food is a bad thing. I think children from single mothers not getting educated. I'm not done yet. You've yapped for so long. Let me yap. Jesus. This is a yapping program.
Once argue against my arguments.
Give me the opportunity to yap.
You keep just saying talking points. Just actually argue against my
talking points. They're
arguments.
things I sincerely believe. What the hell are you talking about? I've heard you give talking points for 5 minutes. Let me give talking points.
I want to address something you said.
Jesus.
You said being a man.
Sorry, Ma.
You said it sucks to be a man.
one of these.
Grow up, deal with it. Something to that effect. I completely agree. It is the nature of men to stop being whiny bitches and realize you are going to get pushed in the mud, trampled over and stepped on every step of the way, and you have to get up and crawl through it. That will always be the case. I see a lot of guys on the internet saying it's unfair, women have it easier, and they don't like it. Exactly. My response is, and grow up, be a man. That being said, it is also the historical fact that men in these positions revolt against their systems and burn them down sometimes.
True. And that's where, hold on, dude, let me yap, Jesus Christ. So, sorry, Ma, sorry for taking the Lord's name in vain. Anyways, my point would be that if you want men to not revolt, men are capable of suffering, they're capable of going through sacrifice, positive, put parentheses positive after that word sacrifice. They are capable of enduring so many things as long as you give them a purpose in order to endure those things. And so when I say, you're saying like, well, sacrifice in the objectivist sense is I'm giving something up for something that I don't ultimately value. What I would say is, well, we need to value poor people. We need to value the marginalized. We need to make sure that they're productive. We need to make sure that our soft power and our hard power are all over the world, because I do genuinely think that America has the best governing system on the planet, and I want that to spread across the entire world. So, sacrifice, positive, is a part of this. But we're not selling young men on sacrifice, and we're also not giving them a fair shake either. We're sucking everything out of them, and then we're not giving them a fair return.
Can people opt out of that system?
Sure. Move to Alaska, live in a cabin.
Alaska's pretty nice. They got long summers. People don't realize long growing season. The watermelons are huge.
Pay less taxes. You're going to pay taxes in Alaska. But
no. You get a surplus in Alaska. They pay you.
Yeah, for the oil.
They pay you a dividend, but
Right.
but you're still going to pay sale tax. Still going to pay gas.
Sure.
Still going to pay income tax. Your taxes are going to be more than that.
Okay, go to South Sudan.
Actually, real quick. Everything's substantially more expensive in Alaska.
Yeah.
It's not so much the taxes; it's getting milk to Fairbanks. You know.
Sure.
Well, yeah, for sure.
So you want reindeer milk?
Well, that's also what happens.
That's what you pay for liberty.
That's also what happens when the government
Alaska.
comes in and takes up like 3/4 of the land and then won't let people use those resources.
We should invade Alaska.
No, so again, listen. I'm trying to connect these things, and it seems like maybe I'm not communicating it. Maybe the topic's too.
No, you're doing it fine. I just disagree.
No, well, you haven't actually argued against anything, so that's fine. I'm talking about a process here, and you're saying we need to give men purpose. I agree, but the thing is that you can't centrally plan cultural change and the way that genders are valued. Like you can't. Like what has occurred is that you have taken away their role, and you can't just go, well, I'll teach classes that teach men to be badass, or I'll sell these ideas.
You literally just said that
what contradiction?
The government has robbed people of their sense of gender roles or whatever, and then you said that you can't centrally plan it.
That's not a contradiction.
Yeah, it would be, because
no, they robbed people, and the consequence.
Plan.
That's not how contradictions work.
It could be accidental.
No, I'm saying they robbed people to solve this presumed problem that they fucking created with regulations in the 1920s.
I reject what you said. I
know, because you don't
there
know
was a real problem in the 1930s, which we all agreed to, which was effectively that the depowered fraternal orders were insufficient to deal with the economic moment.
Yes, government caused regulations, and then government reacted poorly in the Great Depression, and then they came in with a fucking Band-Aid.
So you're
saying it took them 100 years.
In the 10s and 20s, the fraternal orders had continued to exist. The fraternal orders would have been able to bounce back the Great Depression.
I think that there is a overwhelming amount of evidence that policies such as the New Deal and FDR elongated and made the Great Depression worse.
I think
that is absolutely
underwhelming amount of evidence that the fraternal orders would have been capable of dealing with the Great Depression.
I think that Keynesian economic theory and this concept of prime the pump has failed us many, many times, and that individuals ought to research the Austrian business
You
cycle.
say this. We are inside a room covered in international goods in plastic.
What
that
the
we
fuck
all
does that
drove
have
and
to do?
flew because we're in the most successful,
whole
rich
argument the whole
society
time.
that's ever lived. So why are we saying that we failed?
Brother.
We didn't fail. We succeeded.
Brother, I've made so many arguments, and then all you have responded. Come on, let me make another one.
This is not conducive to the debate. I got to say, like, just saying over and over again, you're not addressing the debate doesn't actually move the debate forward.
As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I addressed exactly what you said.
What I would argue is
You didn't.
the definition of a successful nation. I would argue that you can say we've become wealthy. The
Materially successful.
However, there are challenges. One thing I like to point out to a lot of these lefties is that a poor person in the United States today has better dental care than Rockefeller did. It's an old trope, it's an old joke, and it's because of technological advancement. But you do mention that we're surrounded by plastics. One thing I would argue is, right now we're dealing with all these tariffs, right? And I was watching the TV as I often do, and a man said, "Why won't anyone buy our beef? We've got great beef. Why won't anyone buy it?" The argument being that they put restrictions on us so that they can capitalize their own internal markets for the sake of their economy. I would counter the reason foreign countries don't buy our goods is because they're full of poison. We've got artificial chemicals and crap in them. And so the reason we don't sell Pop-Tarts in Europe is because Europe has banned TBHQ and artificial dyes in this way. So
Very tasty.
I got a bunch of them downstairs, but they are full of crap. And so my point is, when you argue that we are the most successful in history, I wonder if that is, if we were to quantify what it means by success, could we argue that we've become the most decadent, but arguably self-destructive through our wealth?
It's Rome. We're 100% in Rome. And so give me some latitude, okay? The Rome, I do anyways. I watch Gladiator, and I see the Patriot that is Maximus, and I'm like, God, that looks cool. Like armor, gladius. I know fire arrows weren't a thing, but they look fantastic. And, riding horses, Spanish estate, like all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, that is a cool society to live in. But the truth is that Rome was corrupted and ultimately destroyed through its decadence, through perpetual war, through colonialism, through imperialism, through corrupt senators and corrupt consuls of Rome and all that kind of stuff. And so the thing about it is, I'm really proud of what America has achieved already, but the truth is that there is a spiritual rot. I think we all agree that there's a spiritual rot, and liberalism, capital L, the governing system, is not sufficient to deal with the spiritual rot of our society.
I agree.
And so
that's my whole argument. Yeah.
But I don't think that eliminating the federal government is going to solve that spiritual rot. I think it needs to come from us.
I feel like I'm kind of in between both you guys in your points, but I think you just made a really great point. That one could argue that welfare does enable certain things, but the issue that I largely see, often discuss, is spiritual rot or a cultural decay. I would refer to it as such. We don't have community anymore. People don't come together.
Yes.
This is not just a governmental thing. It's a technological thing. It's you could argue. I think you guys are. It's like that problem where there's the 6 and the 9 on the ground, and you're looking at it, and you're looking at
It's a 6.
And right. And so I think the argument largely is, you overwhelmingly view it as a problem of the state. You overwhelmingly view it as a problem of industrialization
or spirituality.
No, I disagree. The debate topic is about welfare, right? That's why I'm focusing so heavily on welfare. Again, like I said, I don't want to ever do a univariate analysis. Again, when I bring up Amelia Durkheim, right, in functionalism, right, Anomy is about, like the concept of normlessness is about, the division of labor and society is about the Industrial Revolution. It's about moving away from an agrarian lifestyle with their extended families into cities where now we have the nuclear family and we're less connected. Like these things all interweave and interplay. It's a chicken or egg scenario.
The reason
my argument, let me be quick, right? Like my argument is that welfare is a component of this and that it's not helping and that there are better ways to do it and that the market does it better. I'm not arguing that welfare is the sole reason feminists exist or modern problems. You know what I mean?
Let me ask you a question. If we were to today say we are going to phase out the Social Security system, do you believe elderly people would die?
Well, I think elderly people are already dying, right? Like I think.
Okay, would they die quicker due to starvation, dehydration, neglect, and lack of care?
I mean, it depends on what do you mean by phase out? Because if I was going to phase out Social Security, right, I would say everyone that is 18 or everyone that gets a worker's permit 16 above, right, you no longer pay Social Security tax, and also you're not going to get any, right? Like we have to begin to slowly take the beginnings of the market and phase it out.
So hold on.
Once you implement that over the ensuing decades, will people die from neglect and starvation?
I think we would be far more prosperous and less elderly people.
That's not the question I asked.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I was.
Well, let me add this. The estimates are around 2.5 to 4 workers need to enter the system for every Social Security recipient. So should we implement your system where we say 18, from this point on, no more Social Security, you don't pay, but you don't get, that would still collapse the system largely. The question is, if we were to end Social Security in any capacity, would it result in any number of increased deaths of elderly individuals?
I would expect it to.
Again, I would say it depends on how it's implemented or what it does. But yeah, there's probably going to be poverty in some degree. Like you're pro tariffs, the Trump tariffs, right? As a negotiating tack at the very least, right?
Well, I would say that I'm pro tariffs as a strategy. As Trump has implemented them, I'm a bit skeptical, but willing to see where it goes.
Right, exactly, right. But so you recognize that there is some level of pain when we've been getting fucked over by other countries that say, okay, now we're ready to play ball. We're going to have some pain in order to play ball.
My question was about the death.
Well, no. So I'm using it as a comparison, right? If we have the CBO has said by 2050 we're going to be $121 trillion in debt, and mostly that's Social Security, right? There's going to be some shocks. There's going to be some economic growing pains. I don't know whether or not that's going to lead to death because I don't know. As I said, with the Hayek quote, right? Centralized systems destroy spontaneous order. When you pull those systems out, I don't know that there's going to be more death.
Right, I think
in the long run will definitely be better, but in the short term, I don't know. Maybe.
I don't think anyone believes you, and in that specific point, and I mean that disrespectfly.
No, of course.
I have no problem saying that when recessions hit, people die.
Oh, for sure.
If we were to shut down in any capacity Social Security today, I believe that would decrease the lifespan for the existing elderly, would likely result in death. I have no problem with admitting these things are likely to be for simple reasons. I just think that people need to be honest about what you get from them. The challenge, of course, is then humans are largely scared to admit that they'd be willing to accept death to correct the system. Sometimes you might have to, but my thing is like,
can I be more frank then? I am absolutely willing to accept death. And even if old people die because the Social Security goes away, I'm willing to say not only that they die, I'm willing to say that it was more just than Social Security existing and keeping them alive because taxation is theft and it's evil. What I am saying is that I can't commit one way or the other that taking away one of the biggest tax burdens that on the entire economy is necessarily going to lead to more death because I don't know how the market will respond to that.
So I think the likelihood is that it will, but in the same way, taking away alcohol from an alcoholic or heroin from a heroin addict would kill them as well.
Right.
It might be better in the long term.
But it requires an intermediary of some sort to prevent.
Right. I just don't want you to think I'm being dishonest. I'm just I just don't know what the economy will do.
My point was, and again, I didn't mean it disrespectfully, is that,
of course,
I feel like most people thinking about this, even if they're thinking we shouldn't have the Social Security or welfare state, know that it saved lives, even if it created problems. Like in the Great Depression, elderly, many were impoverished, dying. They were finding bodies. And so they said, okay, we better intervene. Otherwise, how are we going to pay for the body removal? Like there's bad things that happen, even if it's one person dying. I think as adults, we just recognize we try to save lives all the time. Sometimes the act of trying to save lives could make the problem worse in the long run.
It's enabling, right? Sometimes it's enabling. Well, like you wouldn't buy heroin for a heroin addict just because they'll die without it.
But hold on, you
actually
see? Yeah, sorry.
We have clinics that do this.
And
sure, you would taper them, et cetera, right?
No, that's kind of what we're talking about. This is perfectly metaphorical. So for instance, like in Switzerland or whatever, they have clinics that are state supported that effectively give you the exact amount of dose that you need in order to get through your day. But in the meantime, they're trying to help them with all the things that have addiction issues, like employment or re-engaging with their family or becoming a part of the community again. And so what I would say is that like government can be intelligent. We are used to a very dumb, very ineffective form of governance in the United States of America, but I still think that government can be done in intelligent ways. And then one of the things that I wanted to bring up was we were talking about the spiritual rot that's inside the United States of America. I think that what would happen if we cut Social Security, even if we tapered off, we are such a self-centered, hedonistic, nihilistic culture that I almost guarantee you that if there were like 20-year-olds who were going to school and getting their first job, and grandma is like on the side of the road being homeless, and they had to make a choice between buying the PlayStation 1000 or feeding grandma, they're going to pick the PlayStation 1000.
Yep.
Because the PlayStation 1000, I only have gross.
Because they are rats with the electrodes strapped to their brain to hit the dopamine button.
Right.
Again,
But hold on. That is not necessarily a moral indictment. That is also like it's like a physical reality.
Yeah, I agree.
Like we are trained this way by not just the environment we're in, but also by nature.
Right. This is why I was trying to elucidate the role of Anomy and structural functionalism, right? Like what these systems do and how systems affect society. And so like when it's important to recognize that, like, I don't disagree with you that if you cut off something immediately, right, that there would be social consequences. I mean, we saw, for example, in China, they had the one-child policy, and people were leaving babies in the market to die and starve to death over days. And then they got rid of the one-child policy, and they're like, the birth rates will come back, right? Except you can't just make a culture magically think having babies is good when for years you made them think it was evil and you punish them like that. That's a multi-generational problem that doesn't get solved overnight, right? Like I'm all for us having a conversation about how do we get rid of welfare? How do we make the state? How do we shrink the state? How do we be more intelligent about the services that we do use, right? But what I'm just trying to get to initially is an understanding that welfare is a part of this problem, and that we have to recognize that.
I would agree that welfare has created a lot of issues, enabling problems, et cetera. I think I feel like it's complete technological revolution which is causing a lot of this. The decentralization of media has created bifurcated and I mean more than two.
For sure, yeah.
But the decentralization of media, has shattered American culture. Multiculturalism is not functional, doesn't make sense. It doesn't. The argument initially of multiculturalism was predicated upon a single umbrella culture like the American Constitution, for which others exist within, so long as you abide by the top. But that breaks. And so when you get too many different distinct cultures, and I'm not referring to Christian and Muslim, I'm referring to anarchist, leftist, communist, tanky, libertarian, right? You get a paleo-Christian and Orthodox, and all of these different moral identities conflict with each other. Then you don't have a cohesive structure of governance. If the way I like to describe it is that if everybody had and I always use Seamus Coughlin because he's a devout Catholic. If everybody had the same moral worldview as Seamus Coughlin, this conversation wouldn't happen. There would be no need for police. There'd be no need for standing armies. None of it would matter. But of course, the world is comprised of a bunch of different moral worldviews, Declaration of Rights, et cetera. And when you start bringing those things into one government, the government starts to fracture. And then you are going to get an anarchist who says, why am I paying for you? Whereas if this was a singular, but it's true. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying if we were a singular Christian nationalist country where everybody was devout Catholic, people would be like, I am honored to give my money to the state because the state funds the church. They'd love it.
Well, that's where I view liberalism as probably the maximally best governing system while still being relatively coherent. Because liberalism is basically, you show up, you show up, you pay your taxes, you do whatever you want to do with your free time, and then that's it. That's literally like from a liberal perspective, that's all that's required is show up, pay your taxes, and don't be violent to your neighbors.
And this is to clarify the American, we refer to that as traditional or social liberalism.
Sure.
Like distinct from John Locke classical liberalism.
I suppose I probably should read them. But the point
They'd be more like me.
Yeah,
right, yeah,
so
exactly.
But what I find interesting in this conversation that I also want to share before we move on is, so this is basically like, if we're analogizing this to Rome, I'm a Roman soldier veteran, and I'm saying you need to fight and die for the glory of Rome, but Rome is corrupt.
And the Holy Land.
And the whole, I would at least take back Constantinople. But anyways, the point is that like you have to have purpose, you have to have a vision, you have to encourage the next generation, and you have to acknowledge the rot. There's spiritual rot in our society, okay? But hold on,
sorry.
I have two more points. Fabian, I think, is more of like I know you're a veteran, but you're a citizen of Rome who is saying that I don't think the system works, I think we should let it all burn, relatively speaking. And then I think that
Right.
No, I'm serious. When you say cut the welfare state, I think that you say
I'm not an accelerationist. I don't want to let it burn, right? I want.
Hold on. Yeah. Remove the hyperbole from let it burn. He wants it dismantled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want the imperial
my
Roman
channel name
system dismantled.
Since we're talking about Rome, my channel name is Fabian Liberty because it's an inverse of like the socialist organization, the Fabian Society, right? It's named after Fabius Maximus, right? It is named after the strategy that like I don't think accelerationism and like dismantling everything instantly and like, oh, it'll be great once the system is destroyed. No, I think we have to slowly sell these ideas. As you said, right? Great men plant trees of which the shade they will never sit in, right? Like I am trying to push an idea that says, hey, maybe a little less welfare, right? Hey, maybe a little bit more privatization. Hey, a little bit more efficiency. And then eventually I think I want to change the culture. I want to change it so that it does happen slowly so that we move to a better
I think none of it really matters. The only thing that matters is that a large population that shares a moral worldview exerts authority on those that they disagree with.
Wait, hold up. You're going to have to go deeper. What?
You're saying might makes right, I guess.
Not that it makes right. It's just that people with power will enforce whatever they want to enforce. So, for example, I had this argument the other day with Tiffany Cianci where she says she's a free speech absolutist as the founding fathers prescribed with the First Amendment.
I don't think they did.
They did not. They certainly did not. The Second Amendment never applied until 2008 and technically not even until 2010 with McDonald v. Chicago. The First Amendment didn't even apply up until the 90s. George Carlin was arrested for swearing. You couldn't even swear on TV, which is public airwaves. The government regulated your right to speak what you wanted to speak. So the 9th and 10th Amendment, the right of the states and the people reserved to them, has been trampled over tremendously.
Sure.
So my point is, everybody comes out and says, this is the way it should be. This is how the system should operate. And the only thing that has ever really mattered is that a large enough group of people lent their power to a moral ideologue who decided to enforce it in a specific way.
Yeah, so might doesn't make right, but might does make reality, and that's it, right? Now, I did want to brush upon one thing where you were talking about, the dangers of a multicultural society, right? Where people no longer share values and they're not connected within the same community. You're absolutely correct. I mean, I would also like to point out that one of the reasons that I think that we have such a big immigration issue in this country is that corporations and NGOs work to push immigration because they need to prop up a failing welfare state. Like we have brought in...
But they're also propping up a failing birth rate as well.
I agree. That's what happens when you destroy resource accumulation.
No.
That's what happens when men start waiting until their 30s before they can finally start dating young women.
This is a point that I can
what happens when the dating market
is. This isn't the welfare state, though. This is the sexual revolution. This was 100% has to do with contraception and condoms.
Okay.
So when we're talking about, because the entire world, there's plenty of different areas of the planet that don't have the same welfare stuff. They're still experiencing the same problem. Basically, when you give people contraception, when you give them condoms, the birth rate kind of plummets and it trends towards 2. There's maybe 2 or 3 countries. Yeah, there's 2 or 3 countries that have
worse in South
demographic replacement rate birth rates, and it's like Mongolia and Israel, right? And so Mongolia does that because they're right next to China, and they let's face it, they like banging and riding horses and stuff. And then Israel does it because they feel like they're constantly under threat because they underwent like a genocide or an ethnocide at the early of the 20th century. I almost guarantee you, if you gave them an environment in which they weren't under threat in suffering a recent ethnocide or genocide, their demographic replacement.
Okay. Hold on. You made the argument, right? It is this thing. The answer is never univariate, right? Like I agree that birth rates and family planning
but it's not
are
just
made
to support
possible.
the welfare state. It's also to support our economy.
Can I ruin everything by making a point? The birth rate of Gaza is higher than Israel.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
I would still say that
just set the chat on fire.
They're under threat.
I was
just joking about making an.
I agree that when you have contraception, right? When women enter the workforce, when modern hygiene for women products, become available, when indoor plumbing becomes available, when the birth control pill, that all of these things have an effect on the growth of families and the birth rate, right? What I am saying is that there is a chicken and egg scenario.
Sure.
That I agree that these things allow women to wait a longer time to have children, which lowers the range of time that they are fertile, right? Which of course lowers the amount of children that they tend to have over a period of time. Obviously, technological innovations in IVF and things like that extend that window to a certain degree, right? So both of these things are true. But what I am saying is that when men are no longer seen as providers because they work 9-to-5 jobs and massive chunks of their taxes go to prop up women and go to protect women. And then on top of that, they don't have the same resource accumulation. And also on top of that, there is no there's no necessity for men, right? I absolutely agree that men have to go through trials and tribulations in order to become men, but there is no necessity. The state does everything for you. Whereas before, men knew that they needed to go out and bust ass if they wanted to make sure that they could take care of their parents and if they wanted to have a family.
Sure.
And all of these things being devoid of them have changed the way that women view men. Women do not view men in any level of respect, partially because they've checked out, but partially because they're not achieving things, but partially because they're protected.
But this is, okay, here's my point, though. I hear what you're saying, but one of the things that you said was prop up and protect women. Now, this is through the state, through taxation, and therefore it feels more ephemeral, and therefore it's the negative sacrifice that you were talking about. You're paying for an altruism that you don't necessarily agree with, okay?
Yes.
I hear you. However, what I am here to say, which is going to be uncomfortable for young men, is suck it up, buttercup. Your previous generations also went through a bunch of garbage. The generation before that went through even more. The generation before that went through even more. And on top of that, if enough men check out of society and they start smoking pot, playing video games, not being productive, not paying their taxes, not et cetera, this is all going to fall apart. And
Agreed.
so this is
Agreed. Yeah.
This is
That's the easiest revolution ever. Guys, you don't got to fight. You just got to sit around, play
you got to sit around and do nothing because the entire
system will
economic system
collapse.
is going to collapse. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, if you do like eating good food, if you do like good entertainment, if you do like the ability to date women, if you do like a peaceful society in which you don't murder people, then you need to get up off your ass.
I agree with everything you're saying, but quick point, right? I'm sorry. Am I annoying? No, quick point, right? I agree with you that we need to teach that message to men. I agree that it's important. I agree with everything that you just said.
You just the state stealing from them?
No, what I'm saying is that the problem is if we're going to talk about pragmatics, then we have to be honest about pragmatics. No amount of education, no amount of you can spend billions on don't smoke cigarettes ads. And you know what happens? Barely the needle moves.
But
hold on.
I think this is a bad example because
oh my god.
generation is substantively down.
Let me finish.
Okay.
Okay.
It's a bad example.
It's not a bad example. Over time, over generations, it changed.
Sure.
For sure. Over the introduction of vaping, it changed to some degree. But the thing that has immediate impact, what we are talking about is incentives and behavior from the state, right? You can put out campaigns, you can talk to young men, you can do what you want with them, and you're going to have some effect. And I hope you do. I really hope you do, because I believe just like you do that those messages need to be sent to young men. But the problem is just like a gas tax, just like a cigarette tax, a tax on working, which is what we have, a gargantuan tax on building wealth, working businesses, etc., massively disincentivizes that behavior. And some classes and some fucking streamers telling them some things and a couple of we need to sell these things better is not going to have the same effect as the state's intervention.
And then I would go left wing, and then I would say that we need living wages. So
I think it is perfectly fine if there are young men out there that say, I'm going to argue for the same position as Fabian Liberty because you want to fight for your country and you want to fight to change it. I accept that. I also think that some people may say, you know what, I've decided to protest by sitting around playing video games and smoking pot. But I also think that there are people, I've met them, who complain but don't want to engage. And my attitude for them is, my friend, you can easily go down to Mexico. You can go to Alaska. There's a great movie about it, Into the Wild. There is no requirement that you live within the system of roads, military, police, EMTs, clean running water, air conditioning, and water. Most jurisdictions have laws requiring that they provide water to you. Well, maybe not most, but it's because it's typical. I believe Arizona has a law. I could be wrong, but these Mojave states, if you walk into an establishment, they must provide water if they ask for it, because you die. So I look at it this we all have clean running water, even if you're homeless. You can walk into a Taco Bell and ask for a cup; they'll give you one. That's tremendous luxury. Clean running. You're not gonna. People used to drink beer all the time because the water was dirty, and now we have clean running water everywhere. So there's a wealth, even if you just decide to do nothing. So it is fascinating to me when I encounter, again, I'll say for your position, I want to stay in this country. I want to fight to change it. Absolutely commendable and respectable. You disagree with how the system operates, and you're going to stay here, and I assume you pay your taxes.
Well, I mean, I don't pay that many because I'm poor, but yeah.
No, but
that was going to be one of my points, you son of a bitch.
But this is my point. You don't like it. You're engaging with it to try and change it for something that you believe would be better.
Yeah,
The people I meet who argue that I don't want to, I shouldn't, I'll be like, you have the option not to.
Yeah.
You can go to a bunch of different countries
Sudan.
I mean, it's hard to get to, but yeah, I think there's other choices.
It's a fair point.
It's a war zone, but besides that,
But you could go to, like, I got to be honest, there's areas of the Rockies, ain't nobody's going to bother you.
Sure.
And then the argument I hear from people is, why should I leave my society? You were born into a society that, again, was built by other people, and you have been asked, let's equate it this way. You are growing up in a house, and your parents say, it's time to pay rent. You say, that's not fair. Why should I have to? You're free to leave. You don't have to stay.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah. No, I mean, like the most anarcho-capitalist societies in America right now would be like the Amish, right? And not like the click clack,
Or the
but the beachy Amish, right? Like those that like still use cell phones, still work regular jobs, etc. Like those are going to be
Down the street. They sell pet milk, they call it.
pet milk. Well, they call it pet milk because the laws make it illegal for them to sell their fucking
I've been on the internet for way too long. I thought it was something else.
No. No. It's just another way to try and circumnavigate the massive.
It's illegal to sell raw milk.
Sure.
So, but if it's for pet consumption, the jars say not for human consumption, and people walk up, buy a bottle, crack it, and drink it.
I like civilization more than I like this anarchism.
I'm all for.
Sorry, real quick. I want to talk about the protesters who were smoking pot and playing video games. So here's the thing. I'm not a religious literalist. My mom will be disappointed in that. I'm like a deist. Okay. But I think that religion oftentimes shows you the moral systems in which to live that will make your life, generally speaking, better if you follow the system versus not following it. So with the protesters who are checking out a society, smoking pot, playing video games or whatever, the main thing that I would say to them is you are the one who's going to suffer. There have been hundreds of thousands or millions of years of evolution and human beings and all that kind of stuff that led to your creation. As far as we know, we only have this one life guaranteed, and you are wasting your time, you're wasting your energy, you're not finding your wife, you're not having kids, you're not perpetuating the society, you're not contributing. And so what's going to happen is that's cute when you're 25 and you're a NEET. It's cute to see Nick Fuentes and his little Groiper army or whatever being NEETs in their early 20s. It's not cute when you're 50. No one wants to be friends with a 50-year-old who smokes pot and plays video games and doesn't have a family and isn't bought into society. Nobody will want to be your friend.
But let me tell you, this is why this country will go communist. Now, let me clarify. There are a lot of variables affecting us right now that may prevent that, but we have two big phenomenons: the NEET phenomenon of males and the cat lady phenomenon of females.
Well, then we need to create a dating app where they can find each other.
But they don't like each other.
They should get over it.
They're opposite political ends of the spectrum, except on Israel. Israel. Maybe we could make a dating app for people who hate Israel, and then you'll bring the left and right together.
Left and right, you should horseshoe.
Yeah.
But here's my point. There are overwhelmingly, we are seeing largely liberal women. They don't have families. They're not having kids. They're going to require the state to fund them as they get older, more so than even Social Security recipients today, who actually did have 2.5 kids. With the NEET bunch of males, they will be in the same boat. I just watched a movie last night, and it just came out. It's called The Rule of Jenny Penn. Did you guys hear of it?
I have not.
Jeffrey Rush and John Lithgow are, so there's a judge. He suffers a stroke on the bench while sentencing a guy, and they put him in rehab recovery, but he's getting worse. The elderly there are harassed by John Lithgow, who just beats and tortures. He's an old man who has fun beating and torturing people.
I thought this was a comedy.
It is a horrifyingly painful movie to watch. But John Lithgow is very funny, even though he's terrifying. And
all right.
The point is, there was a terrifying moment in this film where, as John Lithgow terrorizes his people, Jeffrey Rush asks another man why he won't speak up so they can put a stop to it. And he says, I don't want my children to see me differently. I don't want them to pity me. And outside of the idea of that, the issue is largely, even with children, you are in a home sustained partially by government. What happens to the people who have no children at all?
I think we're going to have to put them in communities and there's going to be abuse. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we're going to need to put them in communities and there's going to be abuse.
I maybe, but I'll tell you this. The birth rate of Europe right now, I pulled it up while we were talking, is like 1.3.
Yeah.
No, there's going to be a large a large elderly population.
Without the people to sustain them, yeah.
But what happens when it comes to the electorate? They are going to vote and say, we get your stuff.
Yeah.
And what are the young people going to say?
No.
Exactly. And then what happens? This is going to
societal collapse
in a terrifying way. I don't know if you can remedy that. How without people to fund Social Security, and with young people largely saying they will check out How do you pay for the larger elderly population?
I have an answer. Will you indulge me a yap, please?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
I've been waiting for a while, but I've had my fair share of screen
Okay.
minutes.
All right. Cool. So a lot of people hate the concept of 15-minute cities. That it doesn't, appeal to their sense of independence. I think that our leaders are totally failing us by thinking about the future of society. And so I think that if we actually designed like communities, like for instance, like a mall as an example, like if you had apartment blocks that were all built around a central commercial area, if you had the agricultural areas and industrial areas on the outside, if you made commuting very simple and easy, you can either walk or you can ride a bike or ride a car to these things, so you become very efficient as a system. And then also if you make these societies, these micro communities integrated, where not only are there young families that are raising their family with an intelligently designed community that makes having a family good, but you also have the old people be a part of the community where they have access to the central commercial district and they also have an area to live that's easy to visit. There will be people who will reject this because they don't want to live in an intentional community that's very close. But I think a lot of people, for instance, the people who have no family, have no friends, no whatever, they can get up, walk to the mall, drink coffee, drink tea, hang out with the younger generation.
Where's the money from?
Where's the money from? I would say investors.
No. The money for the elderly to buy coffee.
Probably the social safety net, as we were talking about.
But if you need 2.5 to 4 workers in the system to fund,
you're not going to like my answer. So what I would
tax the youth young more.
Well, no, I would say that I think you're going to have to tax them less because the resources are going to be more efficient. But basically, we would try to get society back up to 2.15, 2.5 birth rates. That's obviously going to fail. And then what we do is we open up immigration. So I would try to get the birth rate back up to 2. And then I would, whatever thing we're missing, I would use immigration to shore up.
So the important thing to understand in technological advancement, resources getting cheaper or technology getting better, it's a population growth requirement. So there's 2 things required for technological advancement: is a larger population and a more efficient workforce at the same time. Right now, the United States has and the world has a massive population, which allows for technological expansion, but it's particularly inefficient. If we were to maximize worker specialty for the entire planet, we would probably be 3,000 years more advanced technologically. But the issue is ultimately this: there was a time in human history where a human could know everything a human could know. Today, it's impossible in every respect. In fact, I implore all of you watching to look at how they make i9 processors for computers, and you will get lost so fast. We are quickly approaching a point where, indeed, we are approaching a point where technology, even among the specialists, is exceeding beyond their ability to understand it, such as making a TV requires dozens of different specialties that could not make it on their own. As population begins to rescind, the formula actually, the math actually dictates we will see technological deflation, meaning you will get more expensive TVs, less technological advancement, things will become more expensive.
The good news is that we're in a pretty good, the good news is we're in a pretty good standard of living right now. I yield the floor.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I was just like, all right. Yeah. So listen, I'm not a fan of 15-minute cities that are centrally planned by the state. I think that's a terrible idea. If investors want to
voluntary.
If investors want to try them out and see what they work like, maybe, because I mean, like
Epic City.
Huh?
Like Epic City.
Which one is that?
That one they're talking about in Texas?
Oh my God, the fucking Muslim one? Jesus Christ.
Well, they're allowed to do it. Oh my God.
But seriously, if they have food, if they have shelter, if they have community, if they have all that kind of stuff, if it's a successive, vibrant community, what's the problem?
Libertarians can rag on the religious fundamentalists that are building their cities, but look at the religious fundamentalists solving this problem.
Okay, again,
I like it.
Well, yeah, I don't think I have a lot of problems with Islam. Fuck Islam. I'll just say that. And then just move on from it. And then if you're like, well, how could you
let's go back to policy.
Right? If you say, how could you possibly say that? I don't know, like Google. Fucking, anyways.
Let's go back to the policies.
Yeah, but no, like, so when you're talking about centrally planning it, no. If you're talking about like letting investors do that, that might be something that people agree with. I do think that there's a little bit too much hate towards the concept of 15-minute cities because it's being sold to them with like ads from the World Economic Forum, and they know that it's like fucking eat the pods, right? But Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, right? That is really kind of the thesis of that book, if you've read it, is the concept that social capital has been destroyed. And one of the major reasons social capital has been destroyed is because people don't work in the neighborhood they live in. They don't shop in the neighborhood that they live in, right? So there's all of this commuting. And so your neighbors are like this minor part of your life. I don't know that 15-minute cities actually solve that in any meaningful way. It would be an interesting experiment that I'd like to go through. And like, if we're talking about solutions,
It could be hella private.
It could be, right? Like, again, I think we're kind of like veering off of the topic a little bit, but that's fine. Maybe we beat it to death a little bit. I think that there are opportunities to do that. I will simply say this: if you want investment in 15-minute cities, if you want private companies to do that, you're going to have to start deregulating shit, especially housing market. Massive.
We got a few minutes left, and I just wanted the reason I brought up my question is, with population decline, it is predicted by many Social Security will simply cease to exist at some point.
Yeah, probably.
So what do we do to keep it? And do you need to even do anything at all?
Get the birth rate up to 2.15, and
that's not going to happen.
Immigration as a store gap.
Immigration
As a stopgap.
Hold on.
Can I expand on this because it is really important to groypers? So you go, I'll go afterwards. I'll take a note.
All right. So you do need to do something about it, right? Because every day that we don't do something about it and then we continuously spend money, there are other problems than just that, right? We weaken our currency with inflation. Right. And we're going through so much inflation, increase in the money supply and things like that, which is affecting, and it's because of these entitlement spending that we have. Right. And the weaker we devalue the dollar, what happens if Saudis stop using the US dollar to trade reserve currency? Right. Like, there are a lot of other problems that can occur along the way of like population collapse. I can't predict the market or what the market will or won't do. Right. But this is a problem now, and it's a problem that's ballooning. And like, I do agree that like it's going to come to some type of clash, but I don't want the streets to burn,
I want to answer the question.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So, I worked with plenty of dissident right-wing folks. I think that they can be descriptively accurate while prescriptively insane. And so as a result, you're saying like, well, what do? We have a collapsing birth rate. We have an economy that's based on it. So what I would say is we try to maximize the birth rate as much as possible. I think right now, European whites are at 1.5. I think that Hispanics are at like 1.8 or 2 point something. It's very close. Anyways, the point is that you would try to get the domestic population from 1.5 to 2, and then you would try to supplement with immigration. I think one of the reasons why we have had a cultural crisis, why we've had mass immigration crises, is because the central governments of Europe and America realized that we had an economic problem. And so as a result, they allowed these waves of immigration in order to shore up economic problems, but they never consulted the population. But they never said, we don't have enough workers and we need them, therefore you have to let these people in. They never said it.
But I will also add, it's it's a first-ordered thought process which fails. So,
what do you mean?
What we've found, and I'll even cite Conor, that it didn't work. We thought that bringing these immigrants was going to actually bolster the tax base and the middle class. It did not work. It did the opposite, actually.
How so?
Lowering the value of labor. It's pretty much
it's the lowering of value, lowering the value of labor, creating a vast wealth disparity, haves and have-nots, and the people who came in are consuming more than they're producing. So you're creating...
That would be my problem, or that I would object to.
It's marginal propensity to consume is over.
It's not actually resulting... So, for instance, one of the simple anecdotes is Gen Z is struggling to get jobs where they can start families and buy homes.
Yep.
We are giving immigrants luxury housing in New York City in these hotels.
Insane, yep.
And so that system didn't work. What ends up happening is they bring in as many immigrants as possible. They legalize illegal immigration, essentially. That is, through executive order, actions that would otherwise be illegal were deemed not illegal because we're going to call it asylum instead. But then they
CPP, yeah.
What they did was they said, we're going to give you an asylum hearing, a temporary status, but then they got rid of these court cases and just basically said, you're here. These individuals did not integrate properly. You can't just put a person there and say, hope that fixed the tax base. So it's actually creating a worse problem.
Yeah.
So I'll say one more point to this. You mentioned before, I like tariffs. I do like tariffs. Tariffs have to be strategically implemented. Donald Trump's global tariffs, I believe, I am skeptical on a blanket universal tariff system, but I don't know what his exact plan is. We'll see.
Exactly.
I don't think he knows what his exact plan is, but yes.
So I do think there's people around him who
For
are,
sure.
I pray.
Sure. An argument I saw that was pretty good was an analogy. You may have been able to bench press 300 when you were 30, but you can't do it when you're 80. And the argument that we, as an older nation that once had this great tariff system and great wealth, could simply just go back to the bench and try and lift it, it's not going to work. you need, as you mentioned before, generational problems. These things have to be resolved slowly over time. The mass importation of migrants in Europe has not resulted in solving the problem. It's created social decay and crises. And so what we ultimately get with multiculturalism to this rapid system is violence and conflict, fear, anger, political recoil, and instability. So long story short, Social Security cannot be remedied through immigration.
Okay. The one of the words that you said that I would desperately cling on to is integration. So my ethnicity is I'm Irish, okay? 200 years ago, 300 years ago, we were bog-dwelling barbarians who were throwing rocks at British troops, right? Even up until the 1980s, we had very violent ethnic conflicts with the British. However, I think nowadays, American Irish and also Irish are more celebrated for their contributions to culture, their economic contributions, all that kind of stuff. But that was through a process of integration. That was through an intentional educational effort, particularly in the Americas, in order to give the Irish like a sense of buy-in into the American project. And so I joke about this on my own channel, but I talk about the greater United States of the Americas. I literally think that our entire hemisphere should be united in like a project. And so I was talking about like, fighting and dying for the glory of Rome. I think you need to sell that to recent Hispanic Central American immigrants. And you literally need to say, we are we're not a multicultural society. We are an integrative society where these are the values that we hold. These are the things that we care about. You need to learn the language. You need to learn our principles, and then therefore you can become a citizen of what we're a part of.
So why did Afghanistan fail?
Because we tried to introduce democracy in a decade.
Exactly. So we've got, I think what it's saying.
Well, we have cultural parallels with Central America. They're also a European Christian colonial society.
Sure, but you can't change the values of a population in 10 years. And
I would do it over 3 or 4 generations.
And we don't have that much time.
What do you mean?
So the expectation is that
Are you going somewhere?
In 10 years,
the young people are.
Yeah, there's no young people to pay into the system to sustain Social Security as we see it. What will end up happening is they're going to start by dramatically reducing payments to where they will be substantially more inefficient for doing anything for the elderly. So by 2033, I think is the estimate where the system breaks, but it can still start paying off.
Partial payouts.
And then I think they say by 2037, it's going to be massively less in terms of the payouts. So much so that with inflation and the payouts, it's going to be inconsequential for the recipients.
Yeah, it'll be paying a cell phone bill.
You are not going to bring in populations from Central, South America, Africa, et cetera, largely from Central America, that will be able to adhere to an American system. The mass importation of a largely low-skilled labor force will not create a functioning system.
The thing that I'm going to push back about on this, though, is we obviously see like a correlate GDP going up, like a 45-degree angle, okay? So this is like a leftist theory that I don't agree with, but it's like the labor theory of value, which is basically you have to have people who input into the system in order for the system to function at all. So my thing is, if we have a system, let's say, I don't want to get too descriptive, but basically if we take 10,000 things from all over the world, we assemble it in the United States and we sell it for $1,000, and that company is making like a $400 profit on it or whatever, but the inputs where the laborers did something was cents on the dollar, well then obviously what needs to happen is that the taxes need to come from the final output. So that's where I would be saying is if our GDP keeps going and you say that we can't afford it, then I would say we need to look at the way that we tax things.
We do got to go. We've got to raid Jeremy Hambley over at the Quartering. However, we'll just do quick final thoughts on this. And I will just say my view is if we keep going the direction we're going, including, yes, mass migration to try and solve this problem, the inevitable result is going to be communism. And I mean that in a
not the Star Trek way.
Not that Star Trek wasn't communism. It was post-scarcity liberalism. But what we're going to end up with, I love Star Trek, by the way. We're going to end up with by force integration that won't be socially coherent, but people won't have a say. You are going to get young men checked out. You're going to get high crime. You're going to get destabilization. The system may last for a few decades before ultimately imploding. I don't know for sure. But the system as it stands right now is certainly not functioning, which is why we have the mass migration problem. The recoil is then Donald Trump, the gutting of U.S. institutions, the shutting of the border. There's a reason why people voted for it, whether they knew what they were voting for or not. So I will just wrap it up there. And if you want to give one final thought and a shout out before we go.
Yeah, I'll jump straight to a shout out. Fabian and I fight all the time, so I'm sure we'll be doing it again shortly. My name is Conor. I run 2 YouTube channels. One of them is Counterpoints 40K. It breaks down the wonderful world of Warhammer 40,000. Another channel that I'm building is Counterpoints. It's more politics oriented. Counterpoints is a part of the Valor Media Network. It's a bunch of first responders and veterans and all that kind of stuff who think that our society is getting off the rails. We want to offer a different alternative to young men. I'm not just going to tell you to bootstrap out of your problems, but I'm going to try to give you the tools in order to help you get out of your problems. So if you enjoyed anything that I said, or if you hated what I said, but you want to check us out anyways, type in Valor Media Network into your search bar. You will find a white icon with a microphone on it. That is us. Come over, spend some time with us. And I am streaming there 35 hours a week, 20 to 35 hours a week. So it's a good time to hang out.
Yeah, my name is Scott from Fabian Liberty. You can find me on YouTube, Fabian Liberty. I do some reactions, debates, talk a lot about philosophy, politics, things of that nature. I think, just, check me out if you want to see, those things. We have to engage in reality. And the conversations that we're having seem to be a lot of talking points and a lot of those things. And maybe it's not maybe it's not as entertaining as a lot of other stuff. But if you want to engage in reality and you want to argue with me and really get into the nitty gritty in philosophy and politics and have a good time, then come check me out. I appreciate you guys.
Right on, everybody. We are rating Jeremy Hambley over at the Quartering. So you guys go watch his show on Rumble Live. Thank you all so much for hanging out. We're going to be back tonight at 8 p.m. for Timcast IRL. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast, and we will see you all then.